They told him not to go inside. Not because the entrance was unstable, or because the air might be toxic, but because every team that had stepped too close before him had walked away unsettled, silent, and shaken in ways they couldn't fully explain. The stone doorway had been sealed for more than 2,000 years. No grave robbers. No previous explorers. No light had touched its interior since the day it was closed. And yet, standing there in the dust, the archaeologist felt an unmistakable sensation that he was being watched, by something that should not have existed anymore. Across the ancient world, tombs were meant to be places of rest. That's what we're taught. Carefully constructed monuments to honor the dead, preserve memory, and ensure safe passage into the afterlife. But what if that explanation is incomplete? What if some tombs were never designed to comfort the dead, or the living, but instead to warn, to trap, or to contain something humanity was never meant to disturb? Throughout history, archaeologists have opened graves filled with gold, art, and historical insight. But scattered among these triumphs are discoveries so disturbing that even seasoned experts hesitated. Tombs that caused sudden illness. Chambers that induced panic attacks and hallucinations. Burial sites that defied logic, biology, and sometimes morality itself. These are not stories often told in textbooks or museum exhibits. They exist in field notes, whispered conversations, and abandoned excavation reports. Imagine descending into a narrow stone passage where the temperature drops unnaturally fast. Your footsteps echo in a way that feels wrong, as if the sound is being swallowed rather than reflected. The air smells metallic, sharp and heavy. Your flashlight beam trembles slightly as your hand tightens without you realizing it. You tell yourself this is normal. You've trained for this. But then you notice something carved into the wall ahead. Not decoration. Not prayer. A warning. This is where our story begins, not with treasure, but with fear. Because for every tomb that revealed a civilization's greatness, there are others that revealed something else entirely. A deep, almost desperate anxiety about death, about contamination, about forces that might return if disturbed. Across cultures that never met, never shared language or belief systems, we find the same patterns: sealed chambers hidden behind false walls, curses etched into stone, bodies buried in ways that suggest terror rather than peace. The question is not whether ancient people feared death. The question is what they feared enough to build monuments specifically to keep it buried. Modern archaeology is a discipline grounded in evidence, measurement, and rational explanation. Archaeologists are trained to question myths, to debunk legends, to remain calm in environments that would terrify most people. They work in confined spaces, surrounded by human remains, often in total silence for hours at a time. Fear is not supposed to be part of the equation. And yet, again and again, fear appears. There are documented cases of excavation teams refusing to proceed further. Of researchers requesting reassignment after a single descent into a burial chamber. Of projects halted not because of funding or politics, but because something inside the tomb crossed a psychological line. Sometimes it was the condition of the bodies. Sometimes it was the architecture. Sometimes it was an overwhelming sense that they were intruding on something that was never meant to be uncovered. And this fear isn't always irrational. Ancient tombs are time capsules, not just of culture, but of environment. Some contain lethal molds, toxic chemicals, or sealed atmospheres capable of killing within minutes. Others were intentionally designed as traps, complete with collapsing ceilings, poison reservoirs, or labyrinthine layouts meant to disorient intruders. But even when science explains the danger, the unease often remains. Because in certain tombs, the fear begins before any physical threat is identified. Consider the fact that many tombs include explicit warnings. Not symbolic curses meant for spiritual storytelling, but direct, almost practical threats. Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king. Whoever opens this will suffer sickness and ruin. These messages were carved with care, placed deliberately at points where an intruder would be forced to stop and read. Why? If tomb robbers were the concern, history shows warnings rarely stop them. So who were these messages really for? What makes this even more unsettling is how often the warnings align with real consequences experienced centuries later. Sudden illnesses. Unexplained infections. Psychological breakdowns. Entire excavation teams struck by misfortune within weeks of entering certain sites. Skeptics call it coincidence. Believers call it curses. But archaeologists caught in the middle often admit something far more uncomfortable: sometimes they simply don't know. There is a reason certain tombs remain unopened to this day, not because we lack the technology, but because we fear the outcome. Beneath the soil of China lies the untouched mausoleum of the first emperor, rumored for generations to contain rivers of liquid mercury. Modern soil tests confirm mercury levels so high that excavation would be deadly. In Egypt, radar scans reveal hidden chambers behind famous tomb walls, yet officials hesitate. Not every secret is rushed into the light. And then there are the tombs that suggest something even darker: that death was not always the end goal. Archaeologists have uncovered burial sites where bodies show signs of intense physical distress. Skeletons with claw marks on the inside of coffins. Mummies with mouths frozen open, faces twisted as if caught in a final scream. Individuals buried with heavy stones pinning limbs, or with heads separated and placed between their legs. These were not accidents. They were deliberate acts, repeated across cultures separated by oceans and millennia. Why? Some scholars argue these practices were meant to prevent the dead from returning. Others suggest ritual punishment. A few quietly admit that we may be projecting modern comfort onto ancient realities, that death in the ancient world was not always peaceful, and burial was not always an act of compassion. As we move deeper into this journey, one truth becomes impossible to ignore: ancient tombs are not just about honoring the past. They are about controlling it. Controlling memory. Controlling fear. Controlling what is allowed to cross the boundary between the living and the dead. Every sealed doorway, every hidden chamber, every warning carved into stone tells a story, not just of belief, but of anxiety. Anxiety about what happens after death. Anxiety about contamination, spiritual or physical. Anxiety that something unfinished might linger. And perhaps the most disturbing realization of all is this: the fear we feel today when confronting these tombs may not be our own. It may be inherited. A carefully engineered response, built into stone and darkness, designed to reach across time and stop us before we go any further. Because some tombs do not feel like monuments. They feel like messages. Messages that say, "We buried this for a reason." And the deeper we dig, the closer we come to understanding that ancient people may have known something about death, about danger, about the unknown, that we are only just beginning to remember. They were trained to face danger, yet when it came to tombs, even the most experienced archaeologists admitted to a creeping, inexplicable fear. This fear was not rooted in superstition or irrationality, but in the tangible, unsettling atmosphere that pervades spaces built for death. Tombs are not mere stone enclosures, they are meticulously crafted environments designed to contain, to protect, and sometimes, it seems, to terrify. The moment a modern explorer steps inside, they are entering a world engineered for permanence and secrecy, a place where every corner, every shadow, and every echo carries meaning. Archaeologists understand that these are cultural artifacts, that they are windows into the past. Yet, time and again, reports emerge of professionals encountering an almost tangible hostility, an oppressive weight pressing from the walls, ceilings, and floors. They enter expecting history, but find themselves confronting an emotional and psychological force as real as the stone surrounding them. Across continents and cultures, tombs share certain characteristics that heighten this effect. Narrow passages that force the visitor to move slowly, air that feels heavier with each step, the subtle scent of decay or minerals that signals age, and walls adorned with imagery that is both fascinating and deeply unsettling. The designs are deliberate. False doors, hidden chambers, and multiple layers of ceiling are not solely intended to preserve the remains or protect treasures, they serve as barriers, both physical and psychological. Ancient architects understood the power of fear. They knew that the living are often more cautious, more compliant, when faced with invisible threats or overwhelming symbolism. The fear that modern archaeologists report is, in many ways, a legacy of that ancient engineering, a subtle psychological mechanism still operating thousands of years later. Historical records and field reports provide chilling corroboration. Teams assigned to explore certain sites have described feelings of nausea, vertigo, and panic, even when there is no immediate danger. In some cases, instruments fail without explanation, compasses spin erratically, and lights flicker for no discernible reason. These are not moments of cinematic exaggeration, they are documented experiences that have led to temporary or permanent cessation of excavations. The experts involved often describe a sudden and irrational urgency to leave, an internal warning that something unseen is best left undisturbed. While some of these phenomena may eventually be attributed to environmental factors such as toxic gases, mold, or structural instability, there are instances that remain unexplained. The consistency of the responses, the patterns across different sites, cultures, and continents, suggests that fear is not merely coincidental but embedded into the very experience of entering these tombs. Consider the role of warnings etched into walls and doorways. In Egypt, Mesopotamia, and even the Americas, we find inscriptions cautioning would-be intruders. These are not vague spiritual statements, they are often explicit threats describing illness, misfortune, or death for those who disturb the resting place of the dead. Scholars have long debated whether these inscriptions were deterrents for common thieves or symbolic expressions of cultural belief. Yet, when cross-referenced with historical accounts of explorers, tomb robbers, or excavation teams who later experienced injury, illness, or even death, the lines between warning and consequence become eerily blurred. The effect on modern archaeologists is profound. Even when fully aware that these warnings may be nothing more than metaphor or cultural superstition, the presence of words meant to instill fear seems to resonate across time, amplifying the natural psychological response to enclosed spaces and unknown dangers. The architecture of these tombs amplifies the sense of foreboding. Long corridors that twist unexpectedly, chambers that seem disproportionately large or small, and passages that suddenly open into vast empty halls all serve to disorient the visitor. Ancient builders understood spatial psychology, they used scale, proportion, and sound to manipulate perception. Footsteps echo unnaturally, whispers carry further than they should, and silence becomes deafening. It is a calculated orchestration of environment and expectation. Modern scientists recognize that such sensory manipulation can have profound effects on mood and cognition, triggering anxiety, fear, and a heightened sense of vulnerability. For archaeologists, this creates a paradox. Their expertise in understanding history does not inoculate them against the basic human reaction to an environment that feels hostile, unnatural, and alive in its silence. Compounding this effect are the human remains themselves. Tombs are filled with the dead, often preserved in ways that defy natural processes or expectations. Mummies with contorted expressions, skeletons arranged in patterns suggestive of restraint or ritual, and traces of toxic substances such as mercury or cinnabar all contribute to the unnerving atmosphere. The presence of these elements reinforces a sense of danger, not just physical but existential. The dead are not passive objects, their arrangements, treatments, and expressions speak to the living in ways that are both visual and emotional. Archaeologists enter expecting to catalog, to study, to understand. Instead, they are confronted with evidence that death was sometimes accompanied by fear, punishment, or ritualized horror, and that these experiences were encoded into the tomb itself. The effect is cumulative. Each step, each chamber, each encounter with preserved bodies deepens the sense that they are intruding into a world designed to resist intrusion. Scientific explanations provide partial clarity but do not eliminate the experience of fear. Toxic spores, structural hazards, poor ventilation, and chemical residues are real threats that can produce physiological responses, dizziness, nausea, headaches, that mimic fear. Yet, these factors cannot fully account for the consistency of the psychological impact across tombs separated by geography and centuries. There is something more subtle at work. The tombs are cultural constructs imbued with meaning, carefully designed by individuals who understood not only the spiritual and practical significance of death but also the ways in which the living respond to controlled environments. This interplay between physical reality and psychological engineering creates a layered experience that is unique to tomb exploration, one that challenges even the most rational mind. Ultimately, the fear that archaeologists experience is a reflection of the tomb's dual nature. It is both a repository of history and a deliberately controlled environment, a space that preserves the past while simultaneously imposing it on the present. Entering a tomb is not simply a scientific endeavor, it is an engagement with a carefully orchestrated psychological and cultural system. The impact is immediate and profound, shaping not only how archaeologists approach the site but also how they perceive the ancient civilization that created it. For those who have walked these passages, fear becomes a tool of understanding, a key to interpreting the intentions of people who lived millennia ago. The tombs themselves, in their silence and immensity, teach lessons that are impossible to convey in textbooks or lectures. They demand respect, caution, and humility. This is why tombs terrify even experts. Not because of curses, ghosts, or supernatural forces. Not because of irrational beliefs or lack of training. But because tombs are living records of fear itself, preserved in stone, air, and shadow. They confront archaeologists with the limits of human control, the weight of mortality, and the ingenuity of civilizations that understood, with remarkable precision, how to make the living hesitate. And as we explore the world's most disturbing tombs in the chapters ahead, it will become clear that this fear is not an obstacle to discovery, it is part of the discovery itself. Across the ancient world, civilizations took care to leave warnings, not merely in myths or oral traditions, but inscribed into the very stone of tombs, gateways, and sacred sites. These inscriptions are far from generic, they are deliberate, sometimes gruesome messages meant to deter intruders. In Egypt, hieroglyphs along the corridors of pyramids caution that anyone who disturbs the pharaoh's rest will face death or misfortune. In Mesopotamia, clay tablets detail divine retribution for those who violate burial rites. In South America, intricate carvings depict figures suffering torment, accompanied by glyphs that speak of punishment for desecration. What is striking is the consistency across cultures separated by thousands of miles and centuries. Human fear, and the desire to control access to the dead, manifests in remarkably similar ways. These warnings suggest that the act of entering a tomb was never purely a matter of curiosity or greed, it was a transgression with consequences. The language of these inscriptions is often vivid, visceral, and direct. Some describe specific diseases, injuries, or disasters that will befall intruders. Others promise curses that extend beyond the immediate physical, targeting family, wealth, or lineage. Scholars have debated whether these threats were symbolic, religious, or intended to exploit psychological responses to fear. But when cross-referenced with historical records and modern archaeological experiences, the line between warning and reality becomes startlingly thin. There are documented cases where those who ignored these inscriptions later suffered accidents, sudden illness, or other misfortunes, sometimes seemingly beyond the realm of coincidence. While skeptics attribute these incidents to chance, toxic exposure, or environmental hazards, the uncanny alignment with ancient warnings is enough to unsettle even the most rational observers. The psychological impact of these warnings is amplified by their physical placement. They are strategically located at key points in the tomb, entrances, junctions, or before particularly significant chambers. One must pause to read them, to comprehend them, and in doing so, the visitor becomes aware of both the tomb's depth and the potential consequences of proceeding. Ancient architects understood the power of anticipation and dread. They were masters of environmental psychology, manipulating space, light, and sound to heighten the sense of danger. A hallway may narrow unexpectedly, forcing crouching and slow movement, while inscriptions loom overhead, vivid in their threat. Echoes bounce strangely in certain corners, creating auditory illusions that disorient. The effect is cumulative. The further one proceeds, the more acute the awareness of danger becomes. For archaeologists, trained to focus on evidence and rational analysis, this creates a unique tension. The mind recognizes the tomb as a historical artifact, yet the body responds to subtle cues of threat, reinforcing the warnings carved centuries earlier. Some warnings go beyond the textual or symbolic, suggesting that the ancients understood physical dangers inherent to tombs. For example, certain chambers are known to contain toxic substances, mercury in the tomb of the first emperor in China, cinnabar in Mayan burial sites. Other tombs feature hidden shafts, collapsing ceilings, or labyrinthine passages designed to trap intruders. In these cases, warnings may not have been superstition at all, but pragmatic deterrence. Beware this path, for it is lethal. The idea that ancient builders combined spiritual, psychological, and physical elements to protect tombs indicates a level of sophistication often underestimated by modern observers. The warnings are part of a broader system of control, ensuring that only the careful, the respectful, or the trained could proceed safely. Those who ignored them risked not only their lives but their sanity. Yet, the most unsettling inscriptions are those that describe consequences seemingly beyond natural explanation. Some warn of ill fortune following a family line, curses that affect wealth, reputation, or health in ways impossible to measure scientifically. Others depict spectral punishments or encounters with the dead that carry a sense of literal terror. Archaeologists who encounter these messages often report an instinctive unease, a creeping sense of something unseen observing their progress. Even with skepticism and modern safety measures, the experience can be profoundly disorienting. These warnings, though ancient, seem to reach across millennia, activating primal responses that transcend culture and training. The intersection of psychology, environment, and history creates a scenario in which rationality struggles to override instinct. Evidence from multiple cultures reinforces the idea that warnings were taken seriously in antiquity. Tombs with inscriptions frequently coincide with sites that remained undisturbed for centuries, either by choice or by design. Grave robbers avoided certain locations, not because of superstition alone, but likely due to a combination of fear, perceived danger, and the difficulty of access. Even in modern excavations, researchers sometimes hesitate at these same sites, citing not only structural risk but an intangible sense of foreboding. When combined with the physical characteristics of the tomb, tight corridors, uneven floors, hidden chambers, the effect is powerful. The inscriptions act as psychological amplifiers, enhancing every shadow, sound, and scent in the tomb to create a complete sensory experience of threat. The content of warnings often reflects a sophisticated understanding of human psychology. Fear is a tool, not just a byproduct. The ancients knew that explicit threats could influence behavior, but so could suggestion and symbolism. Carvings depicting suffering, mutilation, or spectral punishment engage the imagination in a way that words alone cannot. They create an emotional expectation of danger, which primes the visitor to respond with caution, hesitation, or retreat. This is evident in accounts from modern archaeologists, many of whom describe a sense of moral or ethical pressure when reading these warnings. They feel watched, judged, and compelled to consider consequences beyond the immediate physical environment. In effect, the tomb communicates across time, instilling the same caution it did in its original era. The alignment between warnings and real-world consequences is particularly striking in some cases. Teams entering heavily sealed or inscription-laden tombs have reported unexplained injuries, sudden illness, and psychological disturbances shortly after their expeditions. While environmental factors such as toxic spores, mold, and chemical exposure may explain some of these events, they do not fully account for the uniformity of response, the specific timing, or the breadth of reported effects. Archaeologists and historians alike remain puzzled by these correlations, leading to a complex dialogue between rational explanation and unexplained phenomena. For the visitor, this intersection of cautionary inscription and lived experience blurs the line between myth and reality, creating a profound sense of respect, fear, and uncertainty. The warnings, in essence, are a dialogue between past and present. They communicate intentions, fears, and knowledge that were deeply meaningful to the people who constructed these tombs. They were not merely protective measures, they were expressions of a worldview in which death was both feared and controlled, a domain that could be manipulated with physical, spiritual, and psychological tools. In encountering these inscriptions, archaeologists are forced to grapple with the mindset of cultures long gone, while simultaneously confronting their own vulnerability. The effect is transformative. A simple doorway becomes a threshold not only into a tomb, but into the ancient human psyche, where fear, respect, and mortality intersect in ways that remain powerful today. Ultimately, these warnings reveal that tombs are far more than passive relics. They are dynamic constructs, designed to communicate, to instruct, and to influence those who enter. The ancient builders understood the interplay of environment, psychology, and symbolism in ways that modern science continues to explore. For archaeologists, the experience of reading and encountering these warnings is not merely a professional task, it is an immersion into a world where the past speaks with clarity, urgency, and authority. The inscriptions challenge assumptions about death, power, and human ingenuity, leaving a lingering question that drives much of forbidden archaeology: to what extent were these warnings designed to protect the living, the dead, or something else entirely that humanity may never fully comprehend? The story of Tutankhamun's tomb is one of the most famous in the history of archaeology, often recounted with a mix of awe and dread. It begins in 1922, when Howard Carter, a British archaeologist, and his team uncovered the nearly intact burial chamber of the young Egyptian pharaoh. The tomb was extraordinary, filled with treasures beyond imagination: gilded thrones, jeweled masks, intricately carved furniture, and ceremonial artifacts that spoke of a civilization's sophistication and devotion to the afterlife. Yet, despite the dazzling opulence, the discovery quickly became shadowed by a narrative far darker than mere wealth. Members of Carter's team, and others connected to the excavation, began to die under circumstances that seemed too coincidental to ignore. Newspapers seized upon the idea of a pharaoh's curse, and the public imagination was captivated by the notion that the young king's tomb carried a deadly secret for those who dared disturb it. What is remarkable, even by today's standards, is the combination of documented incidents and the eerie timing of their occurrence. Lord Carnarvon, the financier who funded Carter's expedition, died shortly after the tomb's opening, reportedly from an infected mosquito bite. Within months, other individuals associated with the excavation suffered unexpected deaths, illnesses, and accidents. While some historians argue that the mortality rate is exaggerated, meticulous examination of records reveals that a statistically unusual number of deaths did occur, and often under bizarre or sudden circumstances. Even modern scholars acknowledge that while the idea of a mystical curse is sensationalized, there is a kernel of reality that challenges simple dismissal. The pattern was enough to unsettle the global community and, crucially, the archaeologists who were actively working inside the tomb. They were not dealing merely with relics of the past, they were confronting the possibility that human life itself could be affected by proximity to what had been intentionally sealed and sanctified centuries before. Scientific explanations offer partial understanding but leave gaps that continue to intrigue researchers. One theory suggests the presence of toxic molds, fungi, or bacteria in the sealed tomb environment, potentially causing severe respiratory illness or allergic reactions in those exposed. The sealed nature of the chamber, combined with Egypt's arid climate, could have created a perfect incubator for spores that modern analysis only recently identified. Other scholars point to psychological factors: the power of suggestion, combined with the weight of historical lore and the foreboding inscriptions found throughout Egyptian tombs, could have induced stress-related illnesses, fainting, or even accidents. Still, these explanations do not fully account for the uncanny synchronicity of events, nor the deep, visceral fear reported by those who spent time inside the burial chamber. The intersection of biological hazard, psychological strain, and ancient intent creates an environment in which reality and superstition blur, leaving archaeologists caught between rational science and existential unease. The construction of Tutankhamun's tomb itself reinforces the sense of intentionality and forewarning. Unlike other royal tombs, which were larger and designed to accommodate multiple generations or expansive burial goods, Tutankhamun's tomb is relatively modest and compact. Its corridors are narrow, its chambers densely packed, and every wall, niche, and doorway exhibits a careful orchestration of design. Scholars argue that such compactness may have been a necessity due to the pharaoh's unexpected death, yet it also produces a heightened sense of confinement, echo, and sensory intensity for anyone entering the tomb. Even in modern conditions, the chambers induce an almost tangible pressure, a feeling that the air itself resists intrusion. For archaeologists trained to document meticulously, this physical and psychological tension complicates their work, reminding them constantly that they are navigating a space constructed to contain not only the physical remains of the king but the weight of historical, spiritual, and potentially hazardous forces. Beyond the environmental factors, the tomb offers disturbing evidence of rituals and preparations that challenge modern sensibilities. Tutankhamun's body was wrapped in multiple layers of linen and adorned with amulets, charms, and ceremonial objects meant to protect, guide, and empower him in the afterlife. Among these were items that modern science now recognizes as potentially toxic. Traces of cinnabar, a mercury-based pigment, were found coating some of the burial goods. Mercury exposure can lead to severe illness, neurological symptoms, and in high concentrations, death. The ancients may have recognized its preservative properties or believed in its protective or spiritual efficacy, but for those handling these items centuries later, the risk was real. In this way, the tomb embodies both wonder and danger, a duality that heightens the psychological weight experienced by archaeologists. It is a space of both historical reverence and tangible threat, a combination that few modern professionals encounter in their careers. The narrative of the pharaoh's curse also raises profound questions about the relationship between human belief and mortality. When Lord Carnarvon fell ill, and the press widely reported the event as the result of an ancient curse, the psychological impact extended beyond superstition. It shaped behavior, expectation, and interpretation. Those working in the tomb, aware of the legend and the visible opulence of the funerary arrangements, may have experienced psychosomatic responses, heightened anxiety, increased perception of minor injuries, and amplified stress responses to environmental hazards. These effects, when combined with actual biological dangers or architectural hazards, create a feedback loop in which fear begets misfortune, misfortune begets fear, and the tomb itself becomes a participant in its own narrative. The psychological environment is as carefully constructed as the physical one, suggesting that ancient builders understood the power of perception, suggestion, and dread as tools for protecting the sanctity of their burial sites. Equally compelling is the way Tutankhamun's tomb illustrates the human fascination with forbidden spaces. Despite warnings, both ancient and modern, individuals are irresistibly drawn to uncover the secrets contained within. Archaeologists approach with caution, yet the very act of discovery entails intrusion. Each item lifted, each artifact photographed or catalogued, bridges the gap between past and present, but also carries the weight of consequence. The tension between curiosity and fear, knowledge and preservation, embodies the central paradox of archaeology. The quest for understanding comes with the risk of disturbing forces we may not fully comprehend. Tutankhamun's tomb, in this sense, is not merely a repository of wealth or history, it is a touchstone for the study of human interaction with mortality, risk, and the unknown. The story also underscores a broader pattern observed across other ancient tombs, that extreme care, elaborate sealing, and symbolic warnings often accompany the most prized or sacred burials. Tutankhamun's tomb, though modest in size, represents this duality of reverence and danger. Every detail, from the layout to the choice of materials, from the inscriptions to the placement of artifacts, suggests a conscious effort to communicate across centuries. The builders were not simply creating a resting place, they were orchestrating an experience for anyone who would enter long after the king's death. The tomb communicates caution, respect, and the inescapable reality of human mortality, achieving an effect that is both immediate and enduring for those who step inside. In retrospect, Tutankhamun's tomb serves as a microcosm of the broader mysteries that surround ancient burial practices. It challenges assumptions about safety, morality, and the limits of human understanding. It demonstrates how fear, both real and psychological, can shape behavior across centuries. And it illustrates that even in the presence of extraordinary art, culture, and knowledge, tombs can be sites of danger, unease, and profound existential reflection. For modern archaeologists, the experience is transformative. They do not merely catalog objects or record inscriptions, they engage with a living history of human fear, ambition, and ritualized care. The tomb is simultaneously a monument to a civilization's brilliance and a reminder that some spaces were never meant to be approached lightly. It is within this tension, between fascination and dread, discovery and caution, that the true story of Tutankhamun's tomb emerges, offering lessons that continue to resonate in the study of ancient mysteries and forbidden archaeology. Tombs are often imagined as quiet, sacred resting places, yet some of the most disturbing examples throughout history suggest otherwise. Not every tomb was meant to be opened, explored, or studied by the living. Archaeologists approaching these spaces are not merely uncovering artifacts, they are entering environments carefully constructed to remain sealed, untouched, and inviolate for centuries. The design choices made by ancient builders, hidden entrances, false walls, secret chambers, and elaborate sealing methods, indicate that preservation was only part of the intent. Equally important was restriction, controlling who could enter, when, and under what circumstances. These tombs were less about commemorating life and more about enforcing boundaries between the living and the dead, between knowledge and forbidden understanding. For modern archaeologists, stepping across this threshold is to intrude on decisions made millennia ago with extraordinary foresight, caution, and perhaps fear. Consider the architecture of some ancient burial sites. In Egypt, pyramids and tombs are designed with multiple layers of obfuscation, long, twisting corridors, sudden drops, and chambers hidden behind stone blocks that blend seamlessly with the surrounding walls. A casual observer might assume these features were intended to protect treasure or preserve the body, but they also serve a psychological function, creating hesitation, disorientation, and awe. In Mesopotamia, royal tombs were often buried beneath complex mounds with hidden chambers only accessible via narrow, concealed passages. In South America, some Incan tombs are accessible only by precarious cliffside routes, requiring the intruder to navigate natural hazards as well as man-made barriers. Across these civilizations, a pattern emerges: tombs were intentionally made difficult to access, suggesting that disturbance was not merely discouraged but actively prevented. The ancient world understood that human curiosity is powerful, and these architectural measures were designed to resist it. The physical sealing of tombs often went beyond conventional construction. Doors were reinforced with heavy stones, locked with mechanisms designed to last centuries, and sometimes treated with substances meant to deter or harm intruders. In certain Mayan tombs, cinnabar and mercury were applied to surfaces, both preserving the remains and introducing potentially toxic conditions. The ancient Chinese tombs of emperors like Qin Shi Huang were reportedly surrounded by mercury rivers and traps that would threaten anyone attempting to breach them. These protective measures were highly sophisticated for their time, demonstrating an understanding of materials, environment, and human behavior. For archaeologists, the very act of opening these tombs is fraught with danger, not simply due to age or instability, but because the builders engineered an environment that was actively hostile to intrusion. Beyond the practical and physical, there is the psychological aspect of sealed tombs. Archaeologists consistently report an overwhelming sense of unease in certain chambers. Narrow corridors that force the body to bend unnaturally, sudden drops into vast chambers, and the echoing of footsteps across empty halls create an almost cinematic effect that amplifies fear. The tomb communicates silently, using architecture and spatial design to manipulate perception. False doors and hidden passages further increase the tension, as explorers must question whether what they see is real, a decoy, or a deliberate trap. This manipulation of perception is not accidental, it is a calculated aspect of the tomb's design, a deliberate interaction between builder and future visitor. The ancients recognized that fear could be as effective as physical barriers in protecting the sanctity of the dead. The contents of these tombs often reinforce their intended purpose as spaces not meant to be disturbed. Human remains are frequently arranged in ways that suggest not just preservation but containment. Some bodies show evidence of restraint, heavy stones, or intricate wrappings, implying that the deceased were not simply placed in the tomb but secured against movement or interference. Accompanying artifacts sometimes include objects with potential hazards, such as sharp instruments, toxic substances, or chemical preservatives. In Mayan tombs, cinnabar, a mercury-based compound, was used extensively, exposing anyone who lingered to harmful conditions. These measures suggest that some tombs were constructed with a dual intent, to honor or protect the dead, and to deter or punish the living. Modern excavators, aware of these dangers, approach with extreme caution, yet the presence of these elements still provokes fear, wonder, and ethical dilemmas about the limits of human intervention. There is also the social and cultural significance of tombs that were meant to remain closed. In many ancient societies, tombs were not merely burial sites but sacred spaces tied to religious, spiritual, and political authority. Opening them was a transgression not only against the dead but against the order of society itself. Violating these spaces could carry consequences encoded in myths, oral tradition, and ritual practice. Archaeologists, while operating within modern scientific frameworks, cannot fully escape this cultural resonance. They are aware that their intrusion into these sealed sites echoes a long history of transgression and warning. The psychological weight of entering a tomb that was intentionally restricted centuries ago is compounded by the knowledge that the ancient builders meticulously planned for the possibility of disturbance. Even in the modern era, sealed tombs continue to command a sense of awe and trepidation. Some of the most famous tombs, like that of Tutankhamun or the first emperor of China, were deliberately left unopened for centuries due to perceived danger. The combination of physical hazards, historical warnings, and the mysteries within creates a powerful deterrent, respected by archaeologists, governments, and explorers alike. Radar scans and modern imaging technologies reveal hidden chambers and passageways, yet excavation is often delayed or avoided entirely. The risk of structural collapse, exposure to toxins, or psychological trauma remains significant. These measures demonstrate that the ancient strategy of restriction still holds power, influencing the behavior of the living long after the builders themselves have disappeared. The ethical dimension cannot be ignored. Archaeologists are trained to study, preserve, and understand, yet sealed tombs present profound moral questions. Should certain sites remain untouched, their secrets preserved in perpetuity? Is it more respectful to leave the dead undisturbed, or does the pursuit of knowledge justify intrusion? These dilemmas are not abstract, they influence decision-making, field strategies, and the interpretation of history. The very act of opening a tomb that was never meant to be opened becomes a negotiation between curiosity, duty, respect, and caution. Every step inside is laden with consequences, and the choices of modern archaeologists echo the intentions of those who sealed these spaces long ago. In the end, tombs that were never meant to be opened challenge our understanding of history, mortality, and human behavior. They are engineering marvels designed to withstand not only the passage of time but also the intrusions of the living. They blend physical, psychological, and cultural deterrence into a single, cohesive experience that continues to influence those who encounter them. Modern archaeologists, despite training and technology, must navigate these spaces with humility and caution, recognizing that ancient builders were not merely preserving the dead, they were shaping the experience of the living, controlling what could be seen, touched, and known. In doing so, these tombs assert a timeless authority, reminding us that some doors were never intended to be opened, and that the consequences of crossing certain thresholds extend far beyond what we can predict. The fear they instill is not superstition, it is evidence of human ingenuity, foresight, and a profound understanding of the fragility and curiosity of those who would come after. Archaeologists have long assumed that death in the ancient world was a solemn, controlled affair, a process governed by ritual, respect, and tradition. Yet across continents and millennia, some of the most unsettling discoveries reveal a reality far darker than this assumption. Among the most disturbing evidence are mummies and skeletons found with faces frozen in expressions of anguish, terror, or panic. Unlike the serene depictions often presented in museums, these individuals appear caught in a moment of intense emotion at the time of death, as if the final moments were experienced in full consciousness. Some have mouths agape, eyes wide, fingers clawed into stone, while others display contortions that cannot be attributed to natural decomposition or rigor mortis. These visages challenge modern understanding of ancient burial practices, raising questions about how these people died, what they endured, and whether these tombs were intended to conceal something far more disturbing than the mere presence of the dead. The first implication of such discoveries is the possibility of ritualized fear and suffering. In certain tombs, particularly those associated with high-ranking individuals or sacred rites, human remains suggest that death was not always peaceful. Evidence of binding, restrictive wrappings, or placement of heavy stones atop the body indicates a deliberate intention to limit movement, perhaps to prevent escape, interference, or resurrection. Some skeletons show clear signs of trauma, consistent with intentional injury or restraint, implying that these deaths were, in part, performative or sacrificial. Archaeologists and forensic anthropologists have spent decades attempting to decode these signals, yet in many cases, the precise nature of the suffering remains elusive. The combination of physical evidence and the emotional resonance of the preserved expression creates an eerie, almost visceral impact on those studying the remains. It is as if the ancient dead continue to communicate through their frozen faces, demanding acknowledgement of the terror they experienced. The emotional effect on archaeologists is profound. Unlike ordinary excavation, where the focus is often on cataloging artifacts or reconstructing historical narratives, encountering mummies in this state imposes a psychological weight. Researchers frequently report a sense of unease, heightened alertness, and even anxiety when documenting these remains. The faces seem to capture a universal human experience of fear, connecting modern observers with emotions that transcend culture and time. In some instances, the emotional intensity is so strong that teams have temporarily withdrawn from sites, not due to physical danger but due to the overwhelming atmosphere created by the combination of human remains, ritual objects, and sealed chambers. The frozen expressions act as a bridge between past and present, reminding us that the experience of fear, and the deliberate infliction of it, has long been part of human ritual practice. The presence of such faces also suggests that some deaths were neither natural nor entirely ceremonial in the comforting sense often assumed. Across Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Americas, forensic evidence indicates that individuals were sometimes buried alive, restrained, or otherwise subjected to circumstances that would ensure prolonged suffering. The contorted expressions, the positioning of limbs, and the traces of physical trauma all point to deaths that were violent, fearful, or both. These findings force modern scholars to confront uncomfortable questions. Were these practices intended purely for ritualistic purposes, or did they serve to reinforce power, obedience, or cultural control over life and death? The consistent presence of such disturbing indicators across geographically and temporally disparate sites suggests a pattern, one that cannot be explained as mere coincidence or misinterpretation. In addition to ritualized violence, environmental and chemical factors may have amplified the preservation of these expressions. Certain tombs incorporated substances such as mercury, cinnabar, or resins, which not only served spiritual or preservative purposes but also had the effect of preventing natural decomposition. These chemicals, combined with controlled atmospheric conditions within sealed tombs, allowed facial features to retain their contorted expressions for centuries. While modern science can explain the preservation, it cannot diminish the emotional and psychological impact of seeing a face that appears to convey terror frozen across millennia. The preservation of emotion is rare in archaeological contexts, making these tombs exceptional both scientifically and culturally. Another dimension to consider is the social context of the dead. Many of these individuals were not rulers or high priests. They were attendants, servants, or sacrificial participants accompanying royalty or elite burials. Their deaths may have been intended to serve the deceased in the afterlife, a practice common in various ancient societies. Yet the manner of their deaths, often violent, highly controlled, and deliberately concealed, reveals an underlying hierarchy of fear and power. The elite could command life and death even beyond the physical world, using ritual, chemical intervention, and architectural design to assert control. For modern archaeologists, this challenges not only their technical skills but their understanding of ancient morality, justice, and the human capacity for orchestrated terror. Even when the deceased were of high social standing, the evidence of fear in their expressions cannot be ignored. Pharaohs, kings, and emperors were often mummified or buried with complex rituals designed to protect and honor them, yet many show signs of distress or unnatural positioning. Some speculate that sudden death, disease, or violent circumstances may have played a role, but the consistency of contorted expressions across different individuals suggests that fear, restraint, or ritualized agony was an integral part of the burial process itself. In essence, the tomb becomes not only a final resting place but a theater in which fear is recorded, preserved, and communicated across time. The dead, in their frozen expressions, continue to tell a story that defies simple categorization. The haunting nature of these discoveries is compounded by their unpredictability. Archaeologists may enter a tomb fully expecting to encounter mummies in ceremonial repose, only to find bodies contorted in extreme postures, faces that seem to scream silently, and evidence of struggle. The contrast between expectation and reality intensifies the psychological effect, creating a sense of immediate danger even in a controlled environment. The fear is not purely academic, it engages the senses, emotions, and imagination. Modern teams report feeling watched, anxious, or physically uncomfortable, as if the tomb itself is aware of their intrusion. This experience bridges the gap between ancient intention and modern perception, demonstrating the enduring power of human emotion encoded into stone, linen, and resin. Finally, the broader implications of these screaming mummies challenge conventional narratives of ancient life and death. They force reconsideration of burial practices, social hierarchies, and the psychological sophistication of ancient societies. The combination of ritual, chemical preservation, and architectural control suggests a culture highly attuned to both the physical and emotional dimensions of death. For archaeologists, each discovery is more than a scientific finding, it is an encounter with humanity's deepest fears, meticulously preserved for millennia. The faces, frozen in terror, serve as both warning and testament, a reminder that death, ritual, and power were intertwined in ways that continue to unsettle, inspire, and haunt those who seek to uncover the past. In studying these remains, we are forced to confront not only the realities of ancient life but the enduring universality of fear itself, preserved in the silent, accusing gaze of those long gone yet never forgotten. In the pursuit of understanding ancient civilizations, there are few discoveries as haunting as those that involve the concept of cursed tombs. These tombs, with their elaborate constructions, deceptive architecture, and strange, cryptic inscriptions, often carry an atmosphere of foreboding, as if they were designed not merely to house the dead but to protect them from the living. Across the centuries, these burial sites have become shrouded in myth and legend, with stories of curse-bearing graves that bring untold suffering to those who dare disturb them. The idea of curses is deeply embedded in human culture, and it's not hard to see why ancient cultures would use such stories to protect sacred burial sites. But as modern archaeologists dig deeper into these tombs, something more unsettling emerges, something beyond myth, beyond superstition, a chilling reality that suggests these tombs may indeed have been intentionally sealed with knowledge that extends far beyond the realm of simple cultural protection. The most famous example of this phenomenon is, of course, the tomb of Tutankhamun, which has been associated with a so-called curse for nearly a century. As the story goes, those who entered Tutankhamun's tomb, or were linked to its discovery, were struck by sudden, often untimely deaths. Lord Carnarvon, the financier behind the excavation, passed away just months after the tomb was opened, reportedly from an infected mosquito bite. His death, along with that of several other members of the excavation team and those connected to it, was widely attributed to the curse. The theory was compelling enough to capture the imagination of the public, and it raised the question, was there something more to these legends of tomb curses? Could it be that the tombs of ancient kings were not just sealed for spiritual reasons but were deliberately constructed to protect something far more tangible, something dangerous? When archaeologists began to unearth the tombs of ancient Egyptian pharaohs and Mesopotamian kings, they encountered more than just treasures and burial items, they found complex systems of protection built into the very architecture of the tombs. These systems were not just about safeguarding material wealth or spiritual artifacts, they were designed to deter those who would seek to disturb the tombs in the future. Some tombs featured false doors, labyrinthine hallways, and intricate burial chambers designed to confuse and deter intruders. Others were surrounded by layers of deadly traps, meant to prevent unauthorized entry. In some cases, curses were explicitly etched into the tombs themselves, warnings that death would come to any who violated the resting place of the dead. These measures were both psychological and physical, instilling fear in those who might be tempted to disturb the sacred grounds. However, the idea that ancient tombs were simply designed to deter grave robbers and desecrators does not fully explain the eerie phenomena that still occur around these sites. While it is true that many tombs were sealed with the intention of preventing intrusion, there are also cases where archaeologists and researchers have reported strange occurrences that cannot be easily explained away as superstition or coincidence. The environment surrounding these tombs often plays a significant role in creating a sense of dread. Unusual temperature fluctuations, bizarre electromagnetic readings, and strange physical sensations have been recorded by modern excavators, adding layers of complexity to the already ominous atmosphere. It is as if the tombs, themselves, are alive, somehow imbued with a force that resists discovery. One particularly chilling example comes from the ancient tombs of the Tarim Basin in China, a region where mummies dating back over 4,000 years have been found in remarkably well-preserved condition. The mummies, with their eerie facial expressions and detailed clothing, have sparked widespread fascination, but there is an unsettling undercurrent to their discovery. Archaeologists working in the region have reported a strong sense of foreboding and even panic when approaching these burial sites, as though something unseen was watching them. Some have described the sensation of being followed by invisible forces, while others have reported a deep sense of nausea or vertigo as they entered the tombs. In one particularly disturbing incident, a team of archaeologists experienced a series of inexplicable equipment failures while exploring the tombs, leading some to wonder whether there was something more to these ancient burial grounds than meets the eye. Such experiences are not unique to the Tarim Basin. In other parts of the world, archaeologists have reported similar sensations while exploring ancient burial sites. In Egypt, the tombs of pharaohs are known to be filled with a strange energy, with the air often thick and heavy. In some cases, modern instruments designed to measure radiation or electromagnetic fields have detected unusual readings, suggesting the presence of an unknown force or phenomenon. These occurrences are not easily dismissed as the product of an overactive imagination or atmospheric conditions. They suggest that something more profound is at play, something beyond our understanding of science and nature. The more one delves into the mysterious world of tomb curses, the more the boundaries between the physical and the supernatural begin to blur. It is no longer just a matter of protecting the dead, these tombs may have been intentionally designed to safeguard something much more sinister, something that the ancients feared not only in life but in death as well. Could it be that these tombs were not just meant to preserve the body or honor the deceased, but to contain something far more dangerous, something that could affect the living? Perhaps the very purpose of these elaborate burial sites was to trap an entity or energy that ancient civilizations believed could wreak havoc on the world of the living. In fact, ancient texts and legends often hint at such possibilities. The Epic of Gilgamesh, for example, contains references to gods and spirits that can be bound by ritual and locked away in tombs. The Egyptians, too, had a rich mythology surrounding the afterlife, with gods like Osiris who ruled over the dead, and powerful deities believed to have the ability to enter the world of the living through rituals performed in tombs. In some cases, the dead were believed to take on a dual role, serving as protectors of the living or as entities capable of exacting revenge on those who violated their final resting places. These ancient beliefs were not purely symbolic, they were tied to an understanding of death that transcended the physical realm. Archaeologists working in these tombs are, in a sense, participating in a ritual of exploration, opening doors that were meant to remain closed. The very act of disturbing the tombs may have consequences that we do not fully understand, and perhaps that is why certain tombs have been so carefully sealed and guarded. The idea of a tomb curse may not just be a cultural superstition but an expression of a deeper truth, that the tombs were not merely physical spaces of burial, but metaphysical sites of containment. The dead, in this view, are not simply preserved in stone and bone, they are part of an ongoing cycle, where their influence on the living is perpetuated by the boundaries set by their tombs. Whether this influence is physical, spiritual, or psychological, it speaks to a deeper understanding of the connection between life and death that ancient civilizations possessed. The phenomenon of cursed tombs raises profound questions about the nature of death itself. Was the fear that the ancients held regarding these tombs a reflection of their understanding that death was not an end, but a transition to something more complex and mysterious? Did they believe that the dead could transcend their mortal remains and reach into the world of the living, bringing with them not only knowledge but power, danger, or malice? The rituals performed to seal these tombs may have been an effort to contain this transition, to protect the living from whatever the dead might carry with them. In many ways, the tombs are not just tombs, they are portals, thresholds that separate two worlds, and those who dared to cross those thresholds were, in some sense, challenging the natural order. As we continue to explore these ancient tombs, we must confront the possibility that the curses associated with them may not be mere superstition but an expression of ancient wisdom, a warning about the dangers that lie beyond the veil of death. The very concept of a curse, as unsettling as it may seem, may be an attempt to convey the immense power and unknown potential of the tombs. Archaeologists today are not merely uncovering relics of the past, they are probing into a world where life and death are intertwined in ways that we cannot fully comprehend. And perhaps, in this uncertainty, lies the true nature of the tomb curse, not as a supernatural force, but as a profound reflection of the ancient belief that death holds not just an end, but the beginning of something far more complex. Something far more dangerous. In many ancient cultures, the idea of sacred spaces was not just metaphorical, it was a deeply ingrained reality, interwoven with both spiritual and physical boundaries that no one could cross without consequence. Tombs, in particular, were constructed as such spaces, with the expressed intention of protecting the dead and ensuring that the peace of the afterlife was undisturbed. Yet, despite this sanctity, it was also widely believed that certain tombs held not only the remains of the deceased but powers and forces beyond the comprehension of the living. These tombs, sealed by time and sometimes by mystical barriers, have become legends in their own right, places that challenge both the boundaries of archaeology and the psyche of those who dare to enter them. Some tombs are said to house treasures of unimaginable wealth, others contain the bones of rulers and warriors, but all of them are marked with a single, common characteristic, a sense of danger, a feeling that they were never meant to be disturbed. The deeper the exploration into these tombs, the greater the sense of foreboding and dread. This sense of mystery surrounding tombs is not merely a byproduct of the unknown, it is embedded in the very structure and construction of the tombs themselves. From the outset, ancient civilizations invested incredible time, resources, and energy into ensuring that their burial sites were fortified in ways that modern archaeologists often find baffling. Some tombs, like those of the Egyptian pharaohs, are famous for their elaborate designs, which include false doors, hidden chambers, and complex mazes. These tombs were not merely physical spaces for storing the deceased but intricate sanctuaries, designed to protect the dead from desecration, but also, perhaps, to guard the living from the wrath of the spirits. Ancient texts, often written in codes or riddles, warn of terrible fates awaiting those who violate these sacred resting places. From the elaborate and somewhat mysterious labyrinths of the tombs of the Mycenaeans to the carefully engineered burial chambers of the pharaohs, these spaces are imbued with an air of mystery that seems to transcend time. The question that arises, then, is not just about the tombs themselves but about what they were designed to keep out, and what, if anything, they might still be keeping in. Take, for instance, the tomb of the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang. Discovered in the 1970s, this massive burial complex is one of the most extraordinary archaeological finds of the 20th century. The tomb itself is said to be surrounded by a network of rivers and filled with thousands of life-size terracotta warriors meant to guard the emperor in the afterlife. But this tomb is also believed to be a highly dangerous site. Historical records tell of an elaborate array of traps set to prevent robbers from accessing the emperor's remains. Some ancient accounts even suggest that workers who helped build the tomb were buried alive to keep the secrets of the tomb hidden forever. This practice of entombing workers within the tombs is not unique to China, it appears across other cultures as well. In Egypt, some pharaohs were said to have been buried with their attendants, in some cases with their families, to accompany them into the afterlife. The sheer scale of these rituals hints at the belief that the tomb was a space not only of rest but of power, something that extended far beyond the physical realm. Whether these actions were done to protect the tomb or to ensure that the dead could carry their power into the next world remains unclear. What is certain, however, is that tombs like these were intended to be sealed for eternity, and any violation of that seal, it seemed, was punishable by death. The idea of sealing the dead away, physically and spiritually, raises deep questions about the ancient view of death. For many ancient cultures, death was not an end but a transition. It was a passage to another realm, one that could be influenced or disturbed by the living. To this day, the ancient Egyptians believed in the duality of existence, that the dead could continue to influence the world of the living, both for good and for ill. Pharaohs and other important figures were buried with spells and protections to ensure their safe passage, but also to ensure that they could continue to influence life on earth after their deaths. The tomb itself was a kind of portal, both a sanctuary and a barrier, meant to contain the power of the dead while keeping it from overwhelming the living. This dual purpose is evident in many other ancient tombs. In the ancient Maya tombs, for example, the dead were often entombed with an array of ritual objects designed not only to accompany them in the afterlife but to keep their spirits from becoming restless. These tombs often contained a mix of symbols, weapons, and offerings intended to placate the gods or spirits. The tombs were sealed carefully, sometimes with heavy stone doors or even massive earthworks, which made it difficult, if not impossible, for tomb robbers to access them. In some cases, the tombs were hidden in plain sight, camouflaged by nature or buried beneath layers of earth and stone. The tombs of the elite, particularly, were often constructed as part of a larger spiritual ecosystem, one that extended the tomb's sanctity beyond mere physical protection to the realm of the supernatural. It was as if the tomb itself were a living entity, a site that demanded respect and reverence, one that was imbued with a spiritual weight that was not easily lifted. These tombs are often associated with ancient rituals that were meant to ensure not only the safe passage of the dead but also the continued power and protection of the living. However, the very act of sealing these tombs, ensuring that they would never be opened or disturbed, speaks to a deeper concern, one that centers on the unknown consequences of violating such sacred spaces. There are, after all, repeated stories of curses and misfortune associated with tombs that have been opened. Whether these are simply folklore or whether they contain a kernel of truth remains a mystery. Yet, the fact remains that those who have violated the sanctity of these tombs often pay a steep price, sometimes in the form of death, illness, or financial ruin. It is almost as if these ancient burial sites hold a power that cannot be measured by conventional means, a force that transcends time, space, and the rational understanding of the world. One of the most compelling examples of this phenomenon is the so-called curse of the tomb of King Tutankhamun. When the tomb was opened by British archaeologist Howard Carter in 1922, many members of the excavation team, as well as those connected to it, met untimely and mysterious deaths. The most notable of these was Lord Carnarvon, who financed the excavation and died shortly after the tomb was opened. His death, along with the deaths of others, was widely attributed to the curse of the pharaohs, a curse that many believed was placed on anyone who dared disturb the tomb of a king. While modern science dismisses the curse as superstition and offers explanations such as bacterial infections or even toxic gases in the tomb, the eerie coincidence of these deaths has persisted in the collective memory. It raises a chilling question: could there be something in these tombs, something unseen, that resists human intrusion, something that even modern technology cannot fully explain? This fear, deeply embedded in the human psyche, reveals the profound respect, and fear, that the ancients had for death and the afterlife. They did not just see the tomb as a final resting place but as an active space, a site that carried with it the potential for continued power. The tomb was not simply a memorial, it was a force to be reckoned with, a place where the dead continued to wield influence. It is this power, this sense of forbidden knowledge and energy, that draws so many to these tombs. In their construction, these sites embody the idea that the dead, far from being passive, are active participants in the world of the living. They hold power, sometimes protective, sometimes destructive, that transcends the physical world. And it is this power, this unexplainable force, that remains behind sealed doors, waiting to be discovered, or to remain undisturbed for eternity. As modern archaeologists continue to uncover the secrets of these ancient burial sites, one thing is certain: the tombs will continue to fascinate, terrify, and challenge us. They hold within them not just relics of the past but an enduring mystery that defies explanation. These tombs were built with purpose and intent, both to protect the dead and to ward off the living. What lies within them may never be fully understood, but the chilling legacy they leave behind is one of power, fear, and an enduring reminder of the dangers of trespassing on sacred ground. Whether through folklore, superstition, or unexplained phenomena, these tombs stand as a testament to the fact that some places were never meant to be opened, and some forces are best left undisturbed. The discovery of ancient tombs is often regarded as a key to unlocking the mysteries of the past, a path that can reveal the customs, beliefs, and lives of those who came before us. However, some tombs are not simply repositories of ancient artifacts or resting places for the dead, they are places steeped in a unique kind of mystery and danger, where the very act of uncovering the past can lead to consequences far beyond what was ever anticipated. In certain instances, the discovery of these tombs has been accompanied by inexplicable occurrences, unsettling phenomena, and even tragedies, leading to a belief that the tombs themselves may hold something more, something far beyond mere bones or treasures. Perhaps it is the ancient energies that linger in these sacred places, or the powerful rituals associated with them, that continue to resonate through time, keeping some tombs sealed and their secrets hidden. Among the most intriguing of these tombs are those that have been found in the most unlikely of places, in regions and landscapes where the very idea of a tomb should not have existed. One such example is the tomb of the mysterious warrior, discovered in the remote deserts of Mongolia. This particular tomb, hidden beneath the vast and seemingly desolate terrain, was found by a team of archaeologists in the early 2000s. The tomb itself was not grand, nor was it particularly ornate, but the manner in which it had been sealed was unlike anything the team had ever encountered. The entrance was nearly impossible to detect, obscured by the shifting sands and the natural contours of the desert. Inside, the tomb contained the body of a warrior, whose skeletal remains were surrounded by unusual artifacts, intricate weapons, symbols, and strange amulets that defied explanation. What was even more puzzling, however, was the atmosphere inside the tomb. Despite the oppressive heat outside, the interior was curiously cold, as if the air itself had been preserved, untouched by the passing of time. Some of the team members began to experience dizziness, headaches, and even a sense of disorientation while inside, leading to suspicions that the tomb itself might have been sealed for a reason beyond preservation. As the excavations continued, more strange occurrences followed. Equipment malfunctioned, and certain areas of the tomb became almost inaccessible, as though a force was pushing back against the intruders. Despite the challenges, the team persisted, convinced that this was a significant find. Yet, as they delved deeper into the tomb, they unearthed a set of inscriptions, cryptic symbols that appeared to be written in an unknown language. The symbols seemed to pulse with an energy that was palpable, and the closer the team came to deciphering them, the stronger the sensations of unease became. What was once a straightforward excavation had now turned into something far more unsettling, a search not just for artifacts but for something far more elusive and dangerous. As the weeks passed, one by one, members of the team began to fall ill, some even becoming physically weak and bedridden for days. The cause of their ailments remained a mystery, though many of them attributed their sickness to the tomb itself. It was as if the ancient warrior's tomb had exerted a force over them, a force that no one could explain. Further investigations into the area revealed that the tomb was not an isolated incident. In fact, this tomb was just one of a series of similar burial sites found across the vast expanse of the Gobi Desert. Each of these tombs, while differing in size and design, exhibited similar characteristics: elusive entrances, an unnerving atmosphere inside, and the sensation of an unseen force pressing upon those who dared to uncover their secrets. The warriors buried within these tombs seem to have been part of a group that was both revered and feared, their tombs designed not only to protect them in death but to keep anyone from disturbing them for all eternity. What was most striking, however, was that these tombs were not aligned with the burial practices of surrounding cultures. There was something distinctly unique about them, an influence that seemed to come from far beyond the region and possibly even beyond history itself. Such discoveries are not confined to the deserts of Mongolia. In Egypt, the tombs of the pharaohs are legendary for their grandeur and complexity, but not all tombs in the ancient world were built with the same sense of reverence. Some, like the tomb of the infamous Tutankhamun, are surrounded by a shroud of mystery and misfortune. Since the discovery of King Tut's tomb in 1922, there have been numerous reports of misfortune and unexplained deaths among those who entered it. Perhaps the most famous of these was Lord Carnarvon, the British aristocrat who funded the excavation. He died shortly after the tomb was opened, with rumors circulating that his death was linked to the so-called curse of the pharaohs. While modern science suggests that his death was caused by an infection from an insect bite, the coincidence of his passing, combined with the deaths of several other people associated with the tomb's discovery, has given rise to a more sinister narrative, that the tomb of Tutankhamun was not simply a burial site, but a place of supernatural significance, a place that exacted a toll on those who dared to uncover its secrets. As archaeologists began to examine the tomb in greater detail, they discovered that it was filled with treasures beyond anything previously encountered. Gold, jewels, and finely crafted artifacts filled the tomb, evidence of the pharaoh's wealth and status. Yet, amidst the luxury and opulence, there were strange symbols etched into the walls, symbols that defied any straightforward interpretation. Some scholars have argued that these symbols were not just decorative but were placed there for a specific purpose, to protect the tomb from intruders or to serve as warnings to those who might dare to enter. The strange occurrences surrounding the tomb, combined with the peculiar markings and the sense of unease felt by those who entered, suggest that the tomb of Tutankhamun may have been designed not only to safeguard the dead but to ward off the living. But what did the ancient Egyptians believe lay beyond death? And why would they go to such lengths to protect a tomb, even to the point of leaving behind warnings meant to keep people out? Some have theorized that the ancient Egyptians believed that tombs were not simply physical resting places for the dead, but that they were portals, gateways between the living world and the realm of the dead. This belief is reflected in the elaborate burial practices and the careful construction of tombs, which were meant to ensure a smooth transition for the deceased into the afterlife. It was believed that the soul of the dead could continue to influence the living, either by offering protection or by bringing about curses and misfortune. In this context, the tomb could be seen as a place of power, a space where the living and the dead interacted in ways that were not fully understood. The idea that a tomb might be cursed or protected by supernatural forces, then, would not have been out of the ordinary for the ancient Egyptians. It was simply part of the belief system that governed their understanding of death and the afterlife. Yet, despite the wealth of information available to modern archaeologists, some tombs continue to defy explanation. They remain enigmatic, both in their construction and in the way they affect those who come into contact with them. The unexplained illnesses and misfortunes that plague some archaeological teams are not the result of random coincidence, they are symptomatic of something deeper, something that transcends the material world. There is a power that emanates from these tombs, a force that seems to exist beyond our understanding of science, history, and culture. Whether this force is spiritual, psychological, or physical, it continues to affect those who seek to uncover the secrets of the past. As research into these tombs continues, we are left with more questions than answers. The ancient world remains shrouded in mystery, and while modern technology has allowed us to explore the depths of these tombs in unprecedented ways, it has also exposed the limitations of our understanding. Some tombs are not merely places of burial, they are monuments to something much larger, something that cannot be fully explained by rational thought or scientific inquiry. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of these discoveries is the realization that, no matter how much we uncover, some tombs will always remain beyond our reach, their secrets locked away for eternity. The tombs of the past are not just relics of history, they are still very much alive, and their power continues to shape the world around us, whether we fully understand it or not. These tombs, with their enigmatic contents and eerie atmospheres, are reminders that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, and some forces are better left undisturbed. As the world of archaeology continues to reveal the forgotten corners of human history, it's hard to escape the realization that some discoveries are far more unsettling than we could have imagined. Among the most chilling of these finds are those tombs that appear to have been designed not just for burial, but for confinement, places where the dead were sealed away with a deliberate intent to trap not just their bodies, but their souls, their power, or something far more insidious. These tombs are not just a reflection of ancient death rituals, but a testament to an understanding of life and death that is profoundly different from our own. They are the ultimate symbols of control, control over the dead, control over the living, and perhaps, most disturbing of all, control over forces that modern science cannot explain. One of the most famous examples of such tombs is the so-called Tomb of the Vampire, discovered in the mid-20th century in a remote part of Eastern Europe. This burial site, hidden deep within a forest, contained the skeletal remains of a young woman who had been buried in a manner that suggested fear and desperation. The body was found with a large stone placed across her chest and a thick iron chain wrapped around her limbs. The remains showed signs of severe trauma, and the positioning of the body was unlike any typical burial. Archaeologists were puzzled by the unusual treatment, but it wasn't until they discovered a series of ancient writings nearby that the true nature of the tomb was revealed. The inscriptions, written in an archaic script, contained warnings about the dangers of disturbing the tomb, and suggested that the woman had been buried in a special ritual to prevent her from returning to life. According to the local legend, she had been a notorious figure in life, someone believed to possess unnatural powers, possibly even vampiric abilities. The ancient community, fearing her return, had taken extreme measures to ensure that she would never rise again, burying her with heavy stones and binding her body to prevent any movement. It was as if the tomb itself had become a prison, a place of eternal confinement, where both the body and the spirit were held captive. The chilling nature of this discovery raises the question of whether this was an isolated case or part of a broader cultural belief. Over the centuries, across various regions of the world, there are numerous reports of similar tombs, graves that seem to have been deliberately constructed to entrap the dead. In ancient cultures, there was a widespread belief that the dead could return to haunt the living, or that certain individuals possessed the power to cross the boundary between life and death. In some cultures, the dead were seen as powerful, even dangerous, and their tombs were designed not just as resting places, but as barriers to contain that power. Whether through the use of chains, stones, or even more elaborate burial techniques, these tombs were intended to prevent the deceased from escaping, to prevent their influence from spreading to the living. One such example comes from the tombs of the ancient Celts, where bodies were often placed in a manner that suggested the possibility of escape. The Celts had a complex understanding of death, viewing the afterlife as a realm where the soul could either be at peace or continue to influence the living world. In some cases, the bodies of the deceased were bound in ways that suggested they were being restrained from returning to life. This wasn't just an act of reverence for the dead, it was an act of fear. The dead, it was believed, could return in the form of spirits or ghosts, and those spirits could wreak havoc on the living if not properly contained. The presence of chains, nails, or other restraints in these tombs is often interpreted as a way of preventing the deceased from rising or escaping. These burial practices may have been intended as a form of protection, not just for the dead, but for the community that feared their return. Across many other ancient cultures, there are similar themes. In ancient Greece, for instance, some tombs contained complex mechanisms designed to prevent intrusion. These tombs often featured massive stone doors that were sealed with great care, and in some cases, traps were set to deter grave robbers. However, These measures were not only intended to keep outsiders from disturbing the dead, they also served as a means of protecting the living from whatever force was believed to reside within the tomb. In the Greek worldview, death was not an end but a transition, and some individuals were believed to possess the power to cross that transition in ways that could threaten the living. The tombs, therefore, were not just a final resting place, they were a fortress, meant to hold back the power of the dead. In China, the famous terracotta army guarding the tomb of Emperor Qin Shi Huang provides another stark example of the lengths to which the ancient world went to secure the tombs of the dead. The emperor's tomb was believed to house not only his body but also his spirit, which was to continue to rule in the afterlife. To ensure that he would not be disturbed, the tomb was surrounded by a vast army of terracotta soldiers, each one placed in precise formation, standing guard over the emperor's eternal rest. But the tomb itself is far more than just a place of burial, it is a fortress designed to keep the emperor's power intact, ensuring that his influence would extend beyond the grave. The idea that the dead could retain their power after death was central to the beliefs of many ancient civilizations, and the tombs were built to safeguard that power from any who might seek to steal it or disturb the eternal resting place of the dead. Even in the case of some Native American burial sites, the fear of the dead returning in some form is a theme that appears in the archaeological record. The Native American tribes of the Southwest, for instance, believed that the spirits of the dead could walk among the living if not properly appeased. Some burial sites, especially those of warriors or spiritual leaders, were designed with elaborate stone structures and barriers meant to contain the spirit of the deceased. In some cases, the bodies were placed in elevated positions or in caves that were sealed off from the outside world, as a way to keep the dead from returning to the earth. These tombs were not simply places of burial, they were believed to be traps, designed to contain the power of the dead and prevent it from influencing the living. The question that arises from all of these examples is, why would ancient cultures go to such lengths to trap the dead? Why the fear of the dead returning? The answer, it seems, lies in the ancient understanding of life and death. For many cultures, death was not a simple end but a complex transition, a passage that could be either peaceful or violent, depending on how it was managed. The dead, especially those who held power in life, were believed to retain that power after death. Whether that power was seen as a blessing or a curse, it was something that needed to be controlled. Tombs, in this sense, were not merely a way to dispose of the dead, they were designed to manage the dead, to contain their influence, and to protect the living from the potential dangers that could arise from disturbing the spirits of the deceased. The practice of constructing tombs to trap the dead, to contain their power, and to ward off the living speaks to a fundamental human fear, the fear of what lies beyond death. For many ancient cultures, death was not a finality but a doorway, and the tombs were built to ensure that the passage through that door was one way. Once the dead had passed through the veil, they could not return. The very existence of these tombs, and the elaborate measures taken to seal them, suggest a deep-seated belief in the power of the dead to influence the world of the living. Whether that power was supernatural, spiritual, or simply the product of human imagination, it remains a powerful reminder of the ancient understanding of life, death, and the mysterious forces that lie in between. For modern archaeologists, these tombs present not only a challenge but a mystery. As they uncover these ancient burial sites, they are confronted with more than just the remains of the dead, they are forced to confront the beliefs, fears, and powers that the dead were thought to possess. These tombs, hidden away for centuries or even millennia, continue to hold their secrets. The deeper archaeologists go into these tombs, the more they uncover not just about ancient burial practices, but about the nature of death itself and the way ancient people viewed the boundaries between life and death. The tombs, in their eerie silence, continue to speak, their cryptic designs and powerful structures a reminder that some things, perhaps, are better left undisturbed. The journey of discovering ancient tombs and burial sites is not merely an excavation of physical spaces, but an exploration into the deep, murky well of human history, belief, and the enigmatic forces that once shaped the world. Some tombs, hidden beneath layers of earth and time, reveal more than the remnants of forgotten civilizations, they contain echoes of the past that continue to resonate with unsettling clarity, warning us that some places are not meant to be disturbed. These tombs have a way of grabbing our attention, pulling us into their stories, and inviting us to uncover the mysteries that lie hidden within them. But as we push forward with our modern tools and methods, we begin to realize that the past isn't just something to be uncovered, it's something that may still be alive in some form, carrying with it power that we cannot fully comprehend. In many ways, the tombs we uncover are like mirrors, reflecting not only the lives of the dead but the values, fears, and belief systems of those who constructed them. One such example is the discovery of the ancient tombs in the Valley of the Kings in Egypt. The tombs of Egypt's pharaohs have long captured the imagination of archaeologists and the general public alike. These tombs are not just simple burial sites, they are grand, elaborate complexes, filled with treasures and intricate hieroglyphs, designed to ensure that the deceased would be well prepared for the journey to the afterlife. The tombs were built with meticulous care, with careful attention to detail, as the ancient Egyptians believed that the afterlife was just as important as life itself. But despite the grandeur and wealth that accompanied these tombs, there is a deeper, darker undercurrent that runs through them, one that hints at something more than mere funerary rites and reverence for the dead. One of the most famous tombs in the Valley of the Kings is that of Tutankhamun, the Boy King. When his tomb was discovered by Howard Carter in 1922, it was like opening a time capsule, revealing treasures beyond imagination, golden masks, chariots, weapons, and thousands of other objects, all carefully placed to accompany the king in his afterlife. Yet, what set this tomb apart was not just the opulence and wealth contained within it, but the curse that seemed to hang over it. The so-called curse of the pharaohs became a worldwide phenomenon after a series of mysterious deaths struck those who were connected to the tomb's discovery. Lord Carnarvon, the financial backer of the excavation, died shortly after the tomb was opened, and several others who were associated with the expedition met untimely deaths as well. The curse was believed to be the wrath of the gods or the spirits of the deceased, punishing those who dared to disturb the pharaoh's final resting place. Whether or not this curse was a product of superstition, coincidence, or something more mysterious, it sparked widespread intrigue and fear, and set the stage for similar legends tied to other tombs around the world. The belief in curses surrounding tombs is not limited to Egypt. In fact, it appears throughout different cultures and periods of history. The ancient Chinese, for example, believed that the dead held significant power that could impact the living. The terracotta army that guards the tomb of the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, is perhaps the most striking example of this. Thousands of life-sized clay soldiers, horses, and chariots stand in formation around the emperor's tomb, all created to serve and protect him in the afterlife. The sheer scale of the tomb and its surrounding army suggest that the emperor's power was not to end with his death. His tomb was not merely a resting place, it was a fortress, designed to ensure that he would remain the ruler, even in death. It was also believed that disturbing the tomb could invoke the wrath of the emperor's spirit, leading to misfortune or even death. There are accounts of workers who were involved in the construction of the tomb being killed or sacrificed to ensure that the emperor's secret would be kept. While historians have debated the veracity of these accounts, the idea that the emperor's power could transcend death and affect the living world speaks to a deep-seated fear that continues to influence how we approach tombs and burial sites today. Similar beliefs about the dead holding power persist in various cultures around the world. In parts of Europe, for instance, there have been legends of vampire graves, tombs where the dead were believed to return to life and terrorize the living. These legends often involved elaborate burial practices, such as staking the body through the heart or placing heavy stones on the corpse to prevent it from rising. Such measures were taken not just to protect the living, but to control the power of the deceased, ensuring that they could not escape their tombs and wreak havoc on the world of the living. This fear of the dead returning is not limited to folklore, it was a very real concern in many societies, and the elaborate measures taken to trap the dead reflect the belief that the boundaries between life and death were not as clear-cut as we might think. It's in these tombs, the ones surrounded by mystery and fear, that we begin to see a pattern emerge. These burial sites were not just designed to honor the dead, but to contain them. They were built with the understanding that the dead had a power that could influence the living, whether through spiritual means or through the sheer force of their presence. The tombs, in this sense, were both physical and metaphysical, designed to guard the body, but also to trap the soul, spirit, or power of the deceased. In many ways, these tombs were designed as prisons, not for punishment, but for protection, protecting the living from the dangerous forces that the dead could bring into the world. The belief that tombs are not merely burial sites but powerful, guarded spaces is also reflected in the tombs of ancient warriors. In the ancient world, warriors were often buried with their weapons, armor, and tools of battle, suggesting that they were expected to continue their roles in the afterlife. The tombs of these warriors were often placed in remote locations, designed to be difficult to access, with the belief that the warriors would continue to protect their people from beyond the grave. These tombs were sometimes constructed with elaborate defenses, such as false doors or traps, meant to keep out unwanted visitors, whether grave robbers or wandering spirits. In some cases, warriors were even buried with human sacrifices, believed to accompany them into the afterlife and serve them in death, just as they had in life. These elaborate tombs and their associated rituals suggest a deep belief that the dead had the power to influence the living, and that the tomb itself was not just a space for burial, but a powerful site of spiritual and physical protection. But what happens when we disturb these tombs? The unsettling truth is that when we uncover these sacred spaces, we are not merely retrieving artifacts and bones, we are opening doorways to the past, doorways that may carry with them forces we cannot fully understand. The curse of Tutankhamun's tomb, the terror surrounding the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, and the many legends of restless spirits that guard ancient burial sites all suggest that the act of disturbing the tomb is not just an archaeological endeavor, it is a confrontation with something far greater, something that may not remain confined within the grave. Archaeologists and historians who have worked on these sites often report strange occurrences, equipment malfunctioning, unusual weather patterns, or even physical symptoms like dizziness and nausea. These phenomena have led some to speculate that the tombs themselves may be imbued with a kind of energy, an energy that resists intrusion and seeks to protect the secrets within. The modern world is no stranger to the idea of tombs being more than just burial places. Our fascination with ancient sites often carries a sense of awe, but also an underlying fear that we may be tampering with forces beyond our control. The tombs we uncover are not just relics of the past, they are pieces of a puzzle that continue to shape our understanding of death, power, and the eternal mysteries of existence. The stories of curses, misfortunes, and unexplained occurrences are not merely the stuff of legend, they are part of a deeper truth, that the dead, in some cultures, are not gone. They are present in ways we cannot fully comprehend, lingering in the spaces they once inhabited, their power and influence extending beyond the boundaries of their tombs. In the end, the mystery of these tombs is not just about what we find inside, it's about what we cannot see, what remains hidden beneath the surface. The tombs are not simply places to bury the dead, they are sanctuaries, prisons, and gateways to realms beyond our understanding. Whether through curses, spirits, or the lingering influence of the dead, these tombs remind us that death is not an end, but a transformation that may not always be as final as we would like to believe. And as we continue to explore these ancient sites, we are left with the unsettling realization that some secrets are not meant to be uncovered. Some tombs are better left sealed, their mysteries undisturbed, lest we awaken something that was meant to stay buried for eternity. The discovery of ancient tombs is a pursuit that drives archaeologists and historians to the farthest reaches of the earth. Yet, even with the advancements in technology and the most sophisticated tools at our disposal, these tombs continue to surprise us, revealing mysteries that seem to defy explanation. With each excavation, it's as if a veil is being lifted from the past, and yet the deeper we dig, the more questions emerge, questions that seem almost impossible to answer. What were these tombs meant to protect or conceal? What dangers lie within these ancient burial sites that have managed to remain hidden for centuries? It's in these moments of discovery that we realize that tombs are not merely final resting places, they are the remnants of a complex understanding of death, power, and the forces that govern the boundaries between life and the afterlife. One of the most striking examples of tombs that defy understanding is found in the ancient city of Petra, in what is now Jordan. Petra is famous for its elaborate rock-cut architecture and water conduit system, but beneath the city's surface lies a vast network of tombs, many of which remain largely unexplored. These tombs, carved directly into the sandstone cliffs, are thought to be the burial sites of the Nabatean kings and elite, but the purpose and design of these tombs remain enigmatic. Unlike many other ancient burial sites, these tombs do not conform to the usual practices of the period. They are not only unique in their architecture but also in their placement. Many of them are positioned in ways that suggest they were meant to be seen, not hidden. Yet despite their visibility, these tombs remain shrouded in mystery. The exact beliefs and practices of the Nabateans are not fully understood, but the grandeur and complexity of their tombs suggest that they held death in high regard, and perhaps even feared the powers of the deceased. What, then, were they trying to protect the dead from, or perhaps, more disturbingly, what were they trying to protect the living from? The tombs of Petra are not the only ones that provoke such questions. In fact, the idea of tombs as more than mere burial sites is a theme that repeats itself throughout human history. In the ancient world, tombs were not just designed to house the deceased but to serve as powerful barriers, physical and spiritual, that kept the dead from crossing over into the world of the living. These barriers were built with intention and forethought, often in ways that modern archaeologists still struggle to understand. In some cases, these tombs were equipped with traps or false doors, seemingly designed to keep intruders out or to prevent the dead from escaping. In other cases, the tombs were buried in remote, inaccessible locations, suggesting that the burial site was meant to be protected at all costs. The ancient Egyptians, for instance, believed that death was not the end but a transition to another realm. To ensure a safe journey into the afterlife, the deceased were buried with vast amounts of treasure, food, and other items they would need on their journey. These tombs were elaborate, often hidden from view, and heavily guarded. Pharaohs and other important figures were buried in tombs that were carefully constructed to prevent desecration or robbery. Yet, despite these precautions, there were tombs that still managed to fall prey to grave robbers. In some instances, the tombs were discovered centuries after they were sealed, and when they were opened, they revealed not only the wealth of the deceased but also an eerie sense of foreboding. Some archaeologists have reported strange sensations while working in these tombs, an oppressive air that seemed to cling to the walls, an uneasiness that seemed to pervade the space. The tomb of King Tutankhamun, for example, was discovered by Howard Carter in 1922, and it was immediately surrounded by rumors of a curse. Several members of the team, including Lord Carnarvon, the financier of the excavation, died under mysterious circumstances, fueling speculation that the tomb itself was cursed by the gods to protect the pharaoh's eternal rest. But what is it about these tombs that leads to such fear and superstition? Could it be that the ancient Egyptians, and other cultures, understood something we don't, that there is power in death, power that can linger even after the body has decayed? The idea that tombs are not just physical spaces but also metaphysical ones is one that recurs in many ancient cultures. In China, the tomb of the first emperor Qin Shi Huang is not just an architectural marvel but a powerful symbol of eternal rule. Surrounding his tomb are thousands of life-size terracotta soldiers, each one standing guard over the emperor's final resting place. This massive burial complex was designed to protect the emperor not only in the afterlife but also in the physical world. The tomb itself is said to contain treasures and artifacts of immense value, but what is more remarkable is the belief that the emperor's power would continue after death. His tomb is not just a resting place, it is a fortress, a place that is meant to hold the emperor's spirit in a state of eternal command. Similar themes of eternal power and protection appear in other cultures as well. The ancient Maya believed in a complex afterlife, and their tombs were often designed to reflect this. The tombs of Maya kings and queens were built to ensure that the dead would have access to everything they needed to continue their rule in the afterlife. But it wasn't just about the material items, it was also about the spiritual protection that was built into the tomb itself. These tombs were often designed with elaborate symbols, carvings, and offerings meant to ensure that the dead would be protected from any hostile forces in the afterlife. These tombs were not just a place of rest, they were considered sacred spaces, imbued with spiritual power that could affect the living world. In other parts of the world, tombs were constructed with a very different kind of intention. In Eastern Europe, for example, there is a long-standing tradition of vampire legends, where certain tombs were believed to be the burial places of individuals who were capable of rising from the dead. These tombs were often heavily fortified, with stones placed over the graves to prevent the dead from escaping. In some cases, it was even believed that the souls of the dead could be kept at bay by placing objects like nails or iron rods in the coffin to prevent them from returning to life. The fear of the dead coming back was so pervasive that people would go to great lengths to ensure that the tombs were secure. The rituals surrounding these tombs reflect a deep fear of the unknown, of what might lie beyond death, and of the potential consequences of disturbing that boundary. The stories of these haunted tombs, from the ancient Egyptians to the vampire graves of Eastern Europe, are not just superstitions, they speak to a much deeper fear that has existed throughout human history, the fear of what happens after death, and whether the dead can truly rest in peace. The idea that tombs are not just places of burial but also powerful spaces of spiritual significance is one that crosses cultural boundaries and speaks to a universal truth, that death is not the end, but a transition into something that we cannot fully understand. As modern-day archaeologists uncover these ancient tombs, they are often met with strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena. Whether it's equipment malfunctioning, unexplained illnesses, or strange feelings of unease, these experiences suggest that there is something more to these tombs than we can explain with science alone. The idea that tombs are sacred spaces, filled with lingering energies, is one that continues to captivate the human imagination. Even as we continue to uncover the mysteries of the past, we are reminded that some things may never be fully understood, that some tombs, like the ones in Egypt, China, and Eastern Europe, may be more than just burial sites, they may be powerful forces in their own right, holding secrets that are meant to stay hidden for eternity. The fascination with these tombs is not just about the artifacts or the treasure they contain, it is about the power they hold over our imaginations. The idea that a tomb can contain a force, a presence, or even a curse, is one that continues to resonate with us today. It is this sense of mystery, combined with the fear of the unknown, that keeps us coming back to these tombs, seeking answers even as we are drawn into their unsettling allure. And in the end, perhaps the most disturbing truth is that these tombs, and the power they contain, may never fully be understood. Their secrets are buried beneath the earth, hidden from view, and it is possible that some things are simply too dangerous to uncover. The world of ancient tombs and burial sites is filled with tales of mystery, grandeur, and eerie phenomena. As archaeologists painstakingly uncover these relics of the past, they often find themselves confronted with more than just bones and artifacts. Many of these tombs seem to have been designed with a purpose far beyond the mere resting of the dead, they were built with an understanding of death, power, and the supernatural that transcends the physical world. Some tombs, discovered in the most unlikely of places, continue to defy modern understanding. They seem to be imbued with a presence, a force that lingers long after the tombs have been sealed and forgotten by time. In many ways, these tombs are not just markers of the past but powerful symbols of something much larger, something we have yet to fully comprehend. One such tomb is located in the remote highlands of Peru, hidden away in a forgotten valley where few have dared to venture. Discovered only recently, this burial site dates back to a period long before the rise of the Inca civilization. Its location alone is enough to raise questions, as it sits far removed from the well-trodden paths of ancient trade routes and settlements. The tomb itself is unlike any other found in the region, both in its design and its contents. While the Inca tombs that have been uncovered are often marked by their grand architecture and wealth, this tomb offers a stark contrast. It is small and unassuming, dug into the side of a mountain, with no visible signs of the opulence found in the tombs of kings and priests. Yet, what makes this tomb so remarkable is what was found inside, objects that seem to challenge everything we know about ancient cultures in the Americas. Inside the tomb, archaeologists found not only the remains of an individual but a series of strange artifacts, many of which have no clear parallels to anything else found in the Americas at that time. The objects include intricately carved stone figures, some of which resemble animals not native to the region, as well as items made from materials that were not available locally. Even more puzzling were the strange symbols etched into the walls of the tomb, symbols that appeared to be of a different origin, possibly from a culture long lost to history. These markings and the artifacts themselves have led some to speculate that the tomb may have been the burial site of an individual who had contact with an ancient, possibly even lost, civilization. The presence of such items suggests that this tomb might not have been meant solely for the dead but was part of a larger ritual or practice, one that involved the spiritual protection of the deceased, perhaps even guarding them from forces that were thought to exist beyond the grave. This discovery, while captivating, is not an isolated event. Throughout the world, there are countless tombs that present us with similar mysteries, sites that seem to hold more than just the physical remains of the dead, but something far more elusive and powerful. In ancient Egypt, for example, the tombs of the pharaohs were not merely places of burial, they were meant to protect the ruler's spirit as it journeyed into the afterlife. The tombs were elaborate, filled with treasures and provisions to ensure the king's comfort and safety in the next life. But they were also designed as fortresses, meant to shield the dead from the forces that could threaten them, both from within and beyond. Many of these tombs were constructed with secret chambers, hidden passages, and complex traps designed to keep grave robbers out and ensure that the deceased would remain undisturbed for eternity. But what is it about tombs that evoke such fear and intrigue? Why are some tombs seen as places of immense power, capable of warding off intruders and holding off forces that threaten the sanctity of the dead? It's as if these tombs were designed to be more than just physical structures. They were, in many ways, spiritual fortresses, built with an understanding of death and the afterlife that we can only begin to understand. In many cultures, death was not seen as an end but a transition, one that could be as dangerous as it was sacred. For the ancient Egyptians, as well as many other cultures, the journey into the afterlife was fraught with peril. The soul had to pass through dangerous realms, where it could be confronted by hostile forces, demons, or even other spirits. The tomb, therefore, was not just a place of rest but a place of protection, meant to safeguard the deceased from these dangers. The same can be said for the tombs of the ancient Maya. The Maya believed in a complex afterlife, one that was filled with challenges and trials. In some tombs, archaeologists have uncovered objects that seem to be designed not just to accompany the deceased but to help them navigate the spiritual world. These tombs often contain not only jewelry and other material items but also intricate carvings and symbolic representations of the forces that the deceased would encounter in the afterlife. The tombs were often designed with an understanding of the geography of the spiritual world, with certain objects and symbols thought to provide guidance and protection. This connection between the physical tomb and the spiritual realm is a recurring theme in many ancient cultures, suggesting that the tomb was not just a resting place for the dead but a space where the living and the dead could still interact, where the boundary between life and death was not as rigid as we might believe. Similarly, the tombs of the ancient Chinese emperors, such as the famous terracotta army surrounding the tomb of Emperor Qin Shi Huang, reflect the same belief in the continuity of life after death. The emperor's tomb was designed not only to protect his body but to ensure that he would continue to rule in the afterlife. The thousands of life-sized statues of soldiers, horses, and chariots were meant to accompany him into the next life, where he would need their support in his eternal reign. The tomb, in this sense, was not merely a grave but a symbol of the emperor's ongoing power, a power that transcended death itself. The elaborate design of these tombs speaks to the belief that death was not an end but a continuation of one's rule, and that the tomb was a means of ensuring that this power would not be lost. In this way, the tomb became a symbol of eternal protection, a place that safeguarded the dead and ensured their power endured beyond the grave. Even in the distant past, there were burial practices that involved not just protecting the dead from external forces but also preventing them from escaping their tombs. In Eastern Europe, particularly in the regions of Romania and Bulgaria, there are numerous accounts of vampire graves, tombs where individuals were buried with stakes driven through their hearts or heavy stones placed over their graves. These measures were not just intended to prevent the dead from rising but were thought to ensure that the deceased would not return to haunt or harm the living. The belief in the power of the dead to return and wreak havoc on the living is a common theme in many cultures, and the measures taken to contain them speak to a deep fear of the unknown. These vampire graves reflect a belief that death was not an end but a transition to a state in which the dead could still exert power over the living world. The concept of tombs as places of protection, not just for the deceased but for the living as well, is a thread that runs through many ancient cultures. Whether through elaborate burial rituals, complex traps, or the inclusion of symbolic artifacts meant to guide or protect the dead, tombs were seen as powerful spaces that were both physical and metaphysical, designed to hold the deceased in a state of eternal rest while also shielding them from forces that could disrupt that rest. In many ways, these tombs were not just about protecting the dead, they were about safeguarding the living from the unknown and the unseen forces that might arise from the grave. As modern archaeology continues to uncover these ancient tombs, we are left with more questions than answers. What were these tombs meant to protect? What forces did the ancient cultures believe existed beyond the grave, and why were these tombs designed with such elaborate care to shield the deceased from them? What was it about these tombs that gave them such power? Were they truly imbued with a spiritual force, as some have suggested, or was it the belief in the tomb's power that gave them their strength? As we continue to dig deeper into the past, we may never fully understand the mysteries these tombs hold. But one thing is certain, these ancient burial sites, with their elaborate designs and hidden secrets, continue to fascinate and terrify us, reminding us that death, and the forces that accompany it, are not as easily understood as we might like to believe. The tombs of the ancient world are not just markers of death, they are symbols of the fear, the power, and the mystery that surrounds it. As we uncover them, we are reminded of the ancient belief that death is not an end, but a transition into something far more complex and unknowable. The tombs themselves are not just places where the dead are laid to rest, they are places of power, meant to protect the dead and ensure that their journey into the afterlife is safe, and perhaps, to prevent them from ever returning to the living world. Whether through elaborate construction, powerful symbols, or physical barriers, these tombs were built with the understanding that death is not a finality but a force that must be carefully managed. And as we continue to uncover these tombs, we are left with the unsettling realization that some of their mysteries may never be fully understood, perhaps because some things are simply too powerful to be uncovered. As we continue to explore the ancient world through its tombs and burial sites, we inevitably come face to face with an uncomfortable truth: there are things we don't fully understand. These tombs, seemingly harmless in their appearance, often reveal far more than what meets the eye. They are, in many ways, an enigmatic reflection of the civilizations that constructed them, a glimpse into the mysteries of life, death, and everything in between. But as we peel back the layers of time, we begin to uncover not just the remains of the dead, but a deeper, more unsettling layer of history, one that raises more questions than it answers. The tombs we uncover are often designed not merely as final resting places for the deceased but as powerful and spiritual spaces, constructed with the belief that death is not an end but a transition to something greater, something far more complex. This belief in the continuity of life after death is present in many ancient cultures, but the ways in which these tombs were built to protect, to guard, and even to trap the dead speak to a deep fear of the unknown and the powerful forces that may lie beyond the grave. In the remote regions of Central Asia, particularly within the vast deserts of modern-day Kazakhstan, there lies an ancient burial site that continues to captivate archaeologists and historians alike. Discovered in the early 20th century, the tombs at this site are believed to date back to the early nomadic cultures that once thrived in the area, long before the rise of the great empires that would later dominate the region. What makes these tombs so remarkable is the way in which they were designed, particularly the use of stone structures that seem to have been specifically intended to prevent the tombs from being disturbed or entered. Unlike the elaborate burial sites of Egypt or China, these tombs are simple yet imposing, built with massive stones arranged in such a way that the entrance is all but impossible to locate. The positioning of the stones suggests that these tombs were not meant to be easily found, as if the deceased were not only meant to be sealed away but also hidden from prying eyes. Inside these tombs, archaeologists have found a surprising array of artifacts, tools, weapons, and clothing, items that one would expect to find in a warrior's grave, but the most unsettling discovery of all was the remains of the deceased themselves. Unlike many other ancient burial sites, where the bodies are found arranged in a ceremonial manner, the bodies in these tombs were found in a state of extreme disarray. The bodies had been placed in unnatural positions, twisted and contorted in ways that suggested they had been bound before being interred. The fact that such a harsh and seemingly disrespectful burial practice existed in this otherwise advanced culture speaks volumes about the way these people viewed death. It's as if the deceased were not simply buried but imprisoned, kept from returning to the living world. Was this a ritual to ensure that the dead could not rise again, or were they being held captive in the afterlife, trapped by forces beyond mortal comprehension? This chilling discovery raises a profound question: what did these ancient cultures believe about death and the afterlife? The answer may lie in the burial practices themselves. Throughout history, many cultures have been deeply concerned with the idea of the dead returning to the land of the living. In ancient times, this was often seen as a dangerous and disruptive force, something that could bring misfortune, disease, or even death to those still living. The fear of the dead returning was so pervasive that many tombs were constructed with elaborate measures designed to prevent the deceased from ever rising again. In some cases, these measures took the form of physical barriers, stones, walls, or even entire burial chambers sealed off from the outside world. In other instances, the tombs were designed with traps or false entrances, meant to deter any who might try to enter or disturb the sacred space. The belief in the danger of the dead returning is evident not only in the tombs of Central Asia but in many other parts of the world as well. In Europe, particularly in the regions of Eastern Europe, the fear of vampires and other supernatural beings was once so strong that entire communities would take extreme measures to prevent the dead from rising. In parts of Romania and Bulgaria, there are still many vampire graves, tombs where the bodies of the deceased were found to be impaled by stakes, or even nailed into their coffins, to prevent them from returning to life. These burial practices were often accompanied by rituals and superstitions, with the belief that the dead could possess the power to cross the boundary between the living and the dead and wreak havoc on the world of the living. Whether it was a vampire or some other malevolent force, the fear of the dead returning was one that permeated the beliefs of these ancient peoples, driving them to take extreme measures to keep their tombs and their communities safe. In ancient Egypt, the fear of the dead was manifested in an entirely different way. For the Egyptians, death was not seen as an end, but as a transition into another realm. The tombs of the pharaohs were elaborate, filled with treasures and provisions meant to ensure the deceased's comfort and safety in the afterlife. But the tombs were also designed as spiritual fortresses, with elaborate hieroglyphs and symbols meant to protect the deceased from the forces of chaos and disorder. The ancient Egyptians believed that in the afterlife, the deceased would face numerous challenges, from hostile gods to the forces of nature itself. The tombs were built to shield the dead from these forces, providing a safe haven for the soul as it journeyed through the afterlife. However, the tombs were also meant to prevent the deceased from ever returning to the living world, as if the boundary between life and death was a fragile one that needed to be safeguarded at all costs. The elaborate security measures found in the tombs of Egypt, such as false doors, traps, and hidden chambers, reflect the belief that death was a powerful force, one that had to be respected, and in some cases, contained. These examples are not isolated, but part of a larger cultural understanding that spans across time and space. In many ancient cultures, the tomb was not just a final resting place for the dead, it was a sacred space, a place where the boundaries between life and death were thin, and where powerful forces could be at work. The tombs were constructed with the belief that the dead could, in some way, interact with the living. Whether through the continued power of the deceased, the danger of their restless spirits, or the fear of their return, the tombs became more than just burial sites, they were places of power, designed to keep the dead and their influence safely contained. For modern-day archaeologists, these tombs present a significant challenge. While much of the material culture found in these tombs can be analyzed and understood, the deeper spiritual beliefs and fears that motivated these burial practices are much harder to grasp. What were these ancient cultures truly afraid of? What did they believe about death and the afterlife that led them to take such extraordinary measures? Were these tombs meant to protect the living from the return of the dead, or were they built as a way to preserve the power of the deceased, to ensure that their spirits would continue to exert influence over the living world? One of the most unsettling aspects of these tombs is that they were not just built to honor the dead, they were built to contain them, to guard against their return, and to shield the living from their power. The physical barriers, traps, and spiritual symbols embedded in these tombs suggest a profound understanding of death as something not to be feared, but something to be controlled. The idea that the tomb itself could hold the power to prevent the deceased from crossing over into the world of the living suggests a belief in the thinness of the boundary between life and death, and the need to protect it at all costs. As we continue to uncover these tombs, the questions they raise only multiply. What were these ancient cultures trying to protect themselves from? What did they know about death that we have yet to understand? These tombs, with their elaborate constructions and complex burial practices, speak to something far deeper than mere superstition. They reveal an ancient, powerful belief in the forces that exist beyond death, forces that remain hidden, even today. The deeper we dig into the past, the more we realize that some tombs are not simply burial sites, they are gateways, not just to the afterlife, but to realms beyond human understanding, where the boundaries between life and death blur, and the dead are never truly gone. As the exploration of ancient tombs continues to captivate the minds of archaeologists and history enthusiasts alike, one of the most unnerving revelations to emerge is the way these burial sites appear to reflect not just the beliefs of the cultures that created them but also a deeper, more mysterious understanding of life, death, and the forces that govern both. These tombs are far from simple resting places for the dead. They are powerful symbols of the way ancient societies viewed the afterlife, the spirit world, and the boundaries between the living and the dead. And as each tomb is uncovered, it becomes increasingly apparent that the civilizations responsible for these monumental structures believed that death was not an end but a transition, one that was fraught with danger, power, and unknown forces that could not be ignored. One of the most striking examples of this can be found in the tombs of the Etruscans, an ancient civilization that flourished in Italy long before the rise of Rome. The Etruscans are known for their elaborate tombs, which are often adorned with intricate frescoes depicting scenes from the afterlife. These tombs were not just burial sites, they were designed to be eternal homes for the deceased, places where the dead could continue their lives in a parallel world. The frescoes on the walls of these tombs often show the deceased feasting, dancing, and engaging in various activities, suggesting that the afterlife was viewed not as a place of rest but as a continuation of life, one that was just as rich and full of possibility as the world of the living. But there is also a darker side to these tombs. Many of the frescoes depict violent scenes, including battles and the slaughter of enemies, hinting at the Etruscans' belief that the afterlife was a realm in which power, conflict, and war were just as prevalent as they were in the world of the living. It is as if the tombs themselves were not just meant to house the dead, but to protect them from the forces that would seek to disrupt their eternal existence. The presence of weapons, shields, and armor in the tombs further emphasizes this belief in the afterlife as a place where the dead had to continue fighting, defending themselves from enemies both seen and unseen. This concept of the afterlife as a place of ongoing struggle and conflict is not unique to the Etruscans. It appears in many ancient cultures around the world, suggesting that the fear of what might happen after death was a universal concern. In ancient Mesopotamia, for example, the Sumerians and Babylonians believed that the dead journeyed to the underworld, a dark and forbidding place ruled by the goddess Ereshkigal. This journey was fraught with dangers, and the souls of the dead were believed to face a series of trials before they could reach their final resting place. The tombs and burial sites of Mesopotamia often contained protective charms and offerings meant to help the deceased navigate these dangers. These tombs were not just places of burial but places of protection, meant to shield the deceased from the many threats they might encounter in the afterlife. The presence of these protective items speaks to the Sumerians' belief that death was not an end, but a journey through a dangerous, uncertain realm that required the help of magical objects and rituals to ensure safe passage. Similarly, in ancient Greece and Rome, the tombs of the wealthy were often elaborate affairs, filled with treasures and objects meant to accompany the deceased into the afterlife. These tombs were not only a means of ensuring that the dead were well prepared for the journey to the next world but also served as a way to maintain the power and influence of the deceased, even after death. In many cases, tombs were built to resemble the homes or palaces of the living, complete with furniture, food, and even pets, suggesting that the Greeks and Romans believed the afterlife was a continuation of their earthly lives. But these tombs also served a more protective purpose, ensuring that the deceased would not return to the world of the living. Like the Etruscan tombs, Greek and Roman burial sites often included features designed to keep the dead securely contained, such as heavy stones placed over the graves, false doors, and walls meant to prevent anyone from entering or disturbing the sacred space. These measures were not just about protecting the dead from external forces but about ensuring that the boundary between life and death was maintained, and that the dead remained in their proper place. The Egyptians, of course, are perhaps the most famous example of a culture that viewed the tomb as a powerful and protective space. The tombs of the pharaohs, with their elaborate designs and hidden chambers, were built to ensure the safe passage of the deceased into the afterlife, a realm where they would continue to rule and exert power over their subjects. The Egyptians believed that death was not the end but the beginning of an eternal journey through the afterlife, one that could only be completed with the help of powerful spells, magical objects, and the protection of the gods. To this end, the tombs of the pharaohs were often filled with treasures and offerings meant to accompany them on their journey, as well as magical amulets and charms meant to shield them from the dangers of the afterlife. But the tombs were also designed as fortresses, built to keep the dead from returning to the world of the living. The presence of traps, false doors, and secret chambers in many Egyptian tombs suggests a deep-seated fear that the dead could return and disrupt the lives of the living. This fear of the dead's power and influence is perhaps most famously reflected in the so-called curse of the pharaohs, the belief that anyone who disturbed the tombs of the pharaohs would be cursed and doomed to suffer misfortune or death. This curse, whether real or imagined, highlights the ancient Egyptians' belief that the tomb was not just a resting place but a powerful spiritual barrier, one that separated the living from the dead and protected the living from the dangers of disturbing that boundary. The idea that tombs were not just burial sites but powerful spaces meant to protect the dead and the living alike is a theme that recurs throughout the ancient world. From the tombs of the Etruscans and the Egyptians to the burial sites of the Greeks, Romans, and Mesopotamians, we see a consistent belief that death was not an end but a transition, one that required careful preparation, powerful rituals, and the protection of both the dead and the living. The tombs were not simply places to bury the dead, they were places of power, designed to safeguard the deceased and ensure their safe passage into the afterlife. But they were also places of fear, places that guarded the boundary between life and death, and that kept the forces of the afterlife from crossing over into the world of the living. In modern times, archaeologists have continued to uncover tombs that reflect this same belief in the power and danger of death. In some cases, these tombs contain strange and mysterious artifacts, objects that seem to have no clear purpose or explanation, but that suggest the tomb was more than just a resting place for the dead. These objects often point to a deeper, more complex understanding of death, one that sees the tomb as a site of spiritual power and protection, as well as a place where the forces of life and death are constantly in tension. The tombs that have been uncovered in recent years continue to raise more questions than answers, leading archaeologists and historians to reconsider the way we think about death, the afterlife, and the role that tombs play in this ancient mystery. The tombs we uncover today, with their elaborate designs and strange contents, continue to fascinate us, but they also remind us of the ancient beliefs and fears that shaped them. These tombs are not just archaeological sites, they are windows into a world where death was not just an end but a powerful transition, a journey fraught with danger and uncertainty. As we continue to explore these tombs, we are forced to confront the reality that some mysteries may never be solved, and some tombs may hold secrets that are too powerful to be fully understood. But perhaps that is part of the allure, part of the reason why we continue to search for answers in these sacred and mysterious spaces. The tombs of the ancient world are not just relics of the past, they are reminders of a time when death was both feared and revered, and when the boundary between life and death was a fragile, mysterious thing. Tombs have always been much more than the final resting places of the dead, they are monuments to the culture, beliefs, and mysteries of those who built them. When you step into the realm of ancient tombs, you're not simply walking into a burial chamber but into a portal that leads us to a forgotten world of customs, superstitions, and profound spiritual understanding. The tombs of the past have the unique ability to transcend time, telling stories of civilizations long gone, yet still whispering their secrets through the materials, structures, and artifacts they left behind. They reveal much about how people saw the world beyond the grave, how they sought to protect the dead, honor them, and, perhaps most intriguingly, how they believed that the dead were capable of influencing the world of the living long after they had passed. Take, for instance, the elaborate burial practices of the ancient Chinese, particularly in relation to the tomb of the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. Qin Shi Huang's tomb is legendary not just for the sheer scale of its design but also because of the array of terracotta warriors that were buried alongside him. These life-sized statues of soldiers, horses, and chariots were meant to accompany the emperor into the afterlife, ensuring his continued rule even after death. But the tomb itself, rumored to be located beneath a massive burial mound, remains largely unexplored, shrouded in mystery. Modern-day archaeologists are hesitant to explore the tomb further, not just because of the potential risks but because of the strange reports and rumors surrounding it. Local legends speak of hidden traps and deadly mechanisms designed to protect the tomb from intruders. There are accounts from the early tomb raiders who, upon entering the tomb's vicinity, fell ill or experienced strange phenomena, an unnerving reminder of the ancient belief that tombs were more than just the physical remains of the dead, they were potent spaces imbued with spiritual power that could both protect the dead and wreak havoc on the living. The idea that tombs were imbued with a certain power is not confined to Chinese history. In fact, it is a theme that runs through many ancient cultures, revealing a common thread in humanity's relationship with death. The ancient Egyptians, for example, believed that death was not an end but a continuation of life, albeit in a different realm. For the pharaohs, their tombs were not just a means of ensuring their safe passage to the afterlife, but a continuation of their reign. The tombs were meant to safeguard the power of the pharaoh, ensuring that he could continue to rule from the afterlife. But beyond that, these tombs were designed with elaborate rituals and measures to protect the deceased from any forces, both human and supernatural, that might seek to disturb them. One of the most striking elements of Egyptian tombs, especially those found in the Valley of the Kings, is the careful planning involved in securing the tomb from intrusion. Not only were the tombs hidden deep within the mountainsides to protect them from grave robbers, but they were also sealed with traps and false entrances designed to mislead those who would try to desecrate them. The Egyptians believed in a concept known as the curse of the pharaohs, which held that those who disturbed a tomb would be cursed, often leading to illness or death. The legend of the curse gained traction following the discovery of King Tutankhamun's tomb by archaeologist Howard Carter in 1922. Shortly after the tomb's discovery, several members of Carter's team died under mysterious circumstances, further fueling the belief that the curse was real. The so-called curse was not just a superstition, it was a reflection of the Egyptians' deep understanding of the spiritual power that surrounded these tombs, which were designed to protect the deceased from not only physical threats but also from the forces of the unknown. While the tombs of Egypt are perhaps the most famous, the practice of building burial sites that contain protective measures can be found across the world. In the ancient city of Petra, Jordan, for example, tombs are carved directly into the sandstone cliffs. These tombs, built by the Nabateans, feature elaborate facades and often incorporate hidden chambers, designed to both honor the dead and ensure that their resting places were secure. The designs of these tombs were not merely aesthetic, they were crafted with careful thought to the spiritual and practical needs of the deceased. Some tombs were thought to have been equipped with false doors or secret passageways, reinforcing the idea that the tomb was not merely a site for burial but a location where the dead could interact with the living world. These secret elements suggest that the Nabateans believed that death was not the final stage but a transformative moment, one that could open the door to other realms. Across the globe, the ancient Maya left behind tombs that reveal yet another layer of this complex relationship between the living and the dead. The Maya, with their intricate understanding of astronomy and spirituality, saw death as a transition to a different realm, one where the deceased continued to exert influence over the living. In many of the royal tombs of the Maya, particularly in places like Palenque and Tikal, the tombs are designed not just to house the dead but to ensure that the deceased would be well equipped to continue their journey into the afterlife. The tombs often contained offerings such as jewelry, food, and even figurines meant to accompany the deceased. But what is truly remarkable about these tombs is the way they reflect the Maya's belief in the afterlife. The tombs are often positioned in alignment with celestial bodies, suggesting that the Maya believed the tombs were gateways to another world, one that was governed by powerful cosmic forces. The careful placement of these tombs, combined with the intricate rituals surrounding the burial process, indicates a belief that death was an ongoing journey, one that required careful guidance and protection to ensure a safe passage to the other side. But while these tombs speak to the deep spiritual beliefs of ancient cultures, they also hint at something darker, the belief that death could be a source of danger, not just a natural part of life. The elaborate measures taken to protect the dead from returning or from being disturbed by the living point to a deep-seated fear of what might happen if the dead were to rise again. In many cultures, it was believed that the dead could return from the afterlife, not as benevolent spirits, but as vengeful entities, capable of wreaking havoc on the living. This belief in the return of the dead is reflected in the numerous burial practices meant to ensure that the dead remain securely buried. In some cases, such as in the vampire graves of Eastern Europe, bodies were buried with stones or stakes driven through their hearts to prevent them from returning. These precautions were not just symbolic, they reflected a real fear that the dead could somehow breach the divide between life and death, returning to torment the living. The fear of the dead returning is also evident in the burial practices of the ancient Romans. Roman tombs, particularly those belonging to the wealthy elite, were often designed with elaborate security measures, including false doors and sealed entrances. These tombs were meant to protect the deceased from the forces of the underworld, which the Romans believed were populated by restless spirits, ghosts, and other supernatural entities. The tombs were also designed to ensure that the deceased could not return to the world of the living. In some cases, the tombs were constructed with physical barriers, walls of stone or bricks, designed to keep the deceased in their place. In other cases, the tombs were built with charms, inscriptions, or symbols meant to ward off evil spirits and prevent the dead from coming back. In all these cultures, the tombs served as a powerful symbol of the relationship between the living and the dead. It was not simply a place where the deceased were laid to rest, but a space that represented the complex and often fearful beliefs surrounding death and the afterlife. These tombs, with their hidden chambers, protective measures, and spiritual symbols, were constructed to ensure the safety of both the dead and the living. They reflect a deep understanding of death not as an end but as a transition into a realm where forces far beyond human understanding could have a profound impact on the world of the living. Whether through magical charms, physical barriers, or elaborate rituals, these tombs were designed to protect the deceased from external forces and to keep the boundary between life and death intact. The messages they convey are clear: death is not something to be feared alone, but something that must be carefully controlled, managed, and protected at all costs. The more we uncover of these ancient tombs, the more we realize that they are not just relics of the past, they are windows into the spiritual and cultural worlds of the people who built them. They remind us that death, for all its finality, is a concept that has long been intertwined with the mystery and power of the afterlife. These tombs, built with such care and thought, continue to speak to us across the ages, offering clues about the ways in which ancient cultures understood death, life, and the delicate balance between them. And as we continue to unearth the secrets of these tombs, we are reminded of one undeniable truth: the dead may be gone, but the forces they left behind are still very much alive. The fascination with ancient tombs is not merely a matter of curiosity, it is rooted in a deeper, almost primal sense of awe that transcends time and culture. These burial sites are not just the final resting places of individuals but represent windows into the spiritual, cultural, and emotional landscapes of long-lost civilizations. Each tomb, each burial, carries with it not just the physical remnants of a life but the beliefs, fears, and hopes of a people who saw death as a mystery, one that demanded ritual, respect, and careful preparation. And yet, as much as we know about these tombs, there remains a profound sense of mystery that surrounds them, especially when it comes to their design, contents, and the complex belief systems that motivated their creation. In the remote deserts of China lies one of the most enigmatic tombs ever discovered, dating back to the Han Dynasty. The tomb was unearthed by chance in the early 20th century, when a group of local farmers accidentally stumbled upon a buried structure while digging for water. What they uncovered was a massive, sprawling complex that contained not just the remains of a wealthy individual but an entire burial ecosystem, complete with miniature versions of homes, animals, and workers. What was so startling about this discovery, however, was the fact that it did not conform to any of the burial traditions typically associated with Han Dynasty tombs. The tomb was not just a simple grave or mausoleum, it was a meticulously constructed microcosm of the world that the deceased had known in life. The burial chamber contained items ranging from furniture and clothing to food and even human-shaped clay figurines. But it was the discovery of the miniature workers that left the archaeologists particularly stunned. These figurines were not merely representations of people but appeared to be designed for a very specific function. Each figure had distinct tools, clothing, and postures that suggested they were meant to serve the deceased in the afterlife, continuing their duties even after death. The implication of such a discovery is profound. For the Han Dynasty, this tomb was not merely about honoring the dead, it was about ensuring that the deceased would have everything they needed to continue their existence in the afterlife. The miniature workers and figurines were likely intended to act as servants, providing the deceased with companionship and assistance as they navigated the spiritual realms. This practice was not unique to the Han Dynasty but was a widespread belief in ancient Chinese culture. The idea that the dead would continue to need the services of the living even after they had passed away is a powerful reminder of the complex relationship between life, death, and the afterlife. In this sense, the tomb was not just a burial site, it was a form of spiritual insurance, designed to ensure that the deceased would be well taken care of in the next life, just as they had been in life. Similar beliefs can be found in other parts of the world, where tombs were designed not only to protect the deceased but to ensure that they would continue to exert influence over the living. In ancient Rome, for example, burial sites for the elite were often filled with objects meant to ensure the deceased's continued influence. These tombs were not just about the physical body, they were about maintaining the social, political, and spiritual status of the deceased in the afterlife. The tombs of the Roman emperors, particularly those built for figures such as Augustus and Hadrian, were monumental in scale, filled with statues, inscriptions, and offerings. These tombs were meant to act as a testament to the power of the deceased, ensuring that their legacy would endure even after death. But they also served a more practical function. They were designed to protect the deceased from any forces that might seek to disrupt their rest or return to the land of the living. The concept of the tomb as a protective space is evident in many other cultures as well, particularly those that believed in the possibility of spirits returning from the dead. In Europe, for instance, medieval tombs were often constructed with a variety of measures to prevent the deceased from coming back to life. The fear of vampires, ghosts, and other undead entities was widespread in Eastern Europe, particularly in regions like Romania and Bulgaria. In these areas, it was common for bodies to be buried with stakes driven through their hearts, or for heavy stones to be placed over their graves, to prevent the deceased from rising. These practices were based on the belief that the dead could return to haunt the living, and the only way to prevent this was by physically restraining the body in the grave. The tombs were not just places of burial, they were prisons, designed to keep the dead contained and prevent them from exerting their influence on the world of the living. But why did so many cultures around the world go to such extreme lengths to protect the dead from returning? What was it about death that inspired such fear and awe? The answer lies in the belief systems that shaped these ancient societies. In many cultures, death was not seen as a final end but as a transition to another realm. In ancient Egypt, for example, the afterlife was a complex and dangerous journey that required careful navigation. The tombs of the pharaohs were not just designed to protect their bodies but to safeguard their souls as they made their way through the afterlife. The presence of traps, hidden chambers, and false doors in Egyptian tombs reflected a deep understanding of the spiritual world, a belief that death was a journey fraught with danger, one that required the protection and guidance of the living. The tombs themselves were seen as barriers between the living and the dead, a way to ensure that the dead remained safely confined in the spiritual realm and did not return to the physical world to disrupt the lives of the living. The Egyptians, with their elaborate funerary practices, were not alone in their belief that the dead had the potential to return and interfere with the living. The ancient Greeks, too, held similar beliefs. In ancient Greek mythology, many stories revolve around the theme of the dead returning to the living world, whether as ghosts, spirits, or other supernatural beings. The Greeks believed that the souls of the dead would pass into the underworld, where they would be judged by the gods. However, there was also the belief that the souls of the dead could return to the world of the living, particularly if they had unfinished business or if they were not properly honored in death. To prevent this from happening, the Greeks often made offerings to the dead, hoping to appease their spirits and ensure that they would remain in the underworld rather than returning to haunt the living. Greek tombs were not just places of burial but were often equipped with altars and other structures designed to honor the dead and ensure that their spirits were properly cared for. In other parts of the world, the tombs were constructed not just for the dead but for the living as well. In the ancient city of Teotihuacan, located in what is now Mexico, tombs were built in such a way that they aligned with celestial bodies, suggesting that the dead were believed to be able to influence the heavens. The tombs of the Maya, similarly, often contained items that reflected the culture's deep belief in the power of the dead to influence the world of the living. These tombs were seen as places where the living could connect with the deceased, ensuring that their influence remained strong. The tombs were not just about death, they were about maintaining a spiritual relationship between the living and the dead, one that could ensure the prosperity and well-being of the living world. Even in the modern era, the idea of the tomb as a place of protection and power remains. Archaeologists who unearth these ancient burial sites often report strange occurrences, unexplained phenomena, and feelings of unease when they are near certain tombs. There is something unsettling about these spaces, something that transcends the physical and speaks to a deeper, more spiritual force that resides within them. Whether it's the ancient Egyptian belief in curses or the haunting presence of a tomb that seems to refuse to be disturbed, these sites continue to exude a powerful energy that captivates and unsettles us. The tombs that have been uncovered over the centuries serve as more than just remnants of a bygone era. They are windows into the beliefs, fears, and spiritual practices of ancient cultures that saw death not as a finality but as a powerful transition. The tombs were not merely for the dead, they were meant to protect, to guard, and to maintain a connection between the living and the deceased. As we continue to uncover these tombs, we are reminded that death is not just an end, but a powerful force that requires careful handling, respect, and protection. The tombs themselves, with their elaborate designs, strange artifacts, and spiritual symbols, continue to tell the stories of the ancient cultures that built them, reminding us that the relationship between life and death is far more complex than we might have ever imagined. As we delve deeper into the mysteries surrounding ancient tombs, we begin to realize that they were not merely places for the dead, they were symbols of a profound cultural and spiritual belief system that guided the way ancient societies viewed death, the afterlife, and the forces beyond human comprehension. These tombs, built with such elaborate care and craftsmanship, are not just archaeological sites but vessels of ancient knowledge, conveying the hopes, fears, and understandings of civilizations long past. What we find in these tombs often challenges our contemporary perceptions of death and the afterlife, revealing how advanced and multifaceted these ancient cultures were in their understanding of the world beyond the grave. In fact, many of these tombs contain not only the remains of the deceased but also an intricate set of objects, rituals, and symbols meant to guide and protect the soul on its journey into the afterlife. One of the most captivating aspects of these tombs is the way in which they reflect the belief systems of their builders. Take, for example, the burial mounds of the ancient Celts, found scattered across Europe. Unlike the more familiar stone tombs of the Egyptians or the Romans, the Celtic tombs are often constructed with a reverence for nature, incorporating elements of the surrounding landscape into their design. The Celts viewed death as a transition into another world, one where the spirits of the deceased would continue to live on in a parallel realm. As such, their tombs were often situated in places of natural power, near rivers, mountains, or groves of trees, that were believed to facilitate communication with the spirit world. These tombs were not just physical spaces, they were portals, designed to connect the living with the dead. The presence of burial goods, often including personal items and weapons, suggests that the Celts believed in a journey after death, one where the deceased would need tools and companions to help them navigate the unknown. But even more fascinating than the physical design of these tombs is the symbolism embedded in their construction. The Celts, like many ancient cultures, believed in the cyclical nature of life and death, where death was not an end but a transformation. Their burial practices reflect this belief, as the tombs themselves were often shaped to resemble the natural cycle of life. The burial mounds, in particular, were designed to mimic the shape of a womb, a symbol of rebirth and renewal. This idea of death as a transition, rather than an end, is reflected in the tomb's construction, where the body of the deceased was placed within a chamber that mirrored the shape of a mother's womb, symbolizing the return of the spirit to the earth. In this sense, the tombs of the Celts serve as a reminder of the deep spiritual connection they had with nature and the cosmos, and their understanding of death as a part of a larger, eternal cycle. Similarly, the tombs of the ancient Greeks reflect a profound belief in the afterlife and the journey of the soul. Unlike the Egyptians, who focused on ensuring the deceased would be well equipped for the afterlife, the Greeks saw death as a passage from one state of being to another, a journey that required the proper rituals and guidance. The Greeks believed that the soul would travel to the underworld, a shadowy realm ruled by the god Hades, where it would undergo a series of trials before reaching its final destination. The tombs of the wealthy were often equipped with elaborate offerings meant to appease the gods of the underworld and ensure the deceased's safe passage. These offerings might include food, drink, and even coins to pay the ferryman, Charon, who would transport the soul across the river Styx to the underworld. But what sets Greek tombs apart from those of other ancient cultures is the focus on the soul's journey, rather than the preservation of the body. While the Egyptians went to great lengths to preserve the physical body of the deceased, the Greeks were more concerned with the spiritual aspect of death, believing that the soul could exist independently of the body. This belief is reflected in the tomb's design, which often included elaborate inscriptions and reliefs depicting the deceased in a state of eternal rest. These artistic representations served not only as a memorial to the deceased but also as a way to guide the soul on its journey to the afterlife. The tombs were seen as a temporary resting place for the body, but a permanent home for the soul, which was believed to continue its existence in the underworld or beyond. The Romans, inheriting much of their cultural beliefs from the Greeks, continued to view death as a transition rather than an end. Roman tombs, particularly those belonging to the elite, were monumental in scale and often designed to reflect the status and power of the deceased. The tombs of the emperors were particularly elaborate, with vast burial chambers that contained not only the remains of the deceased but also grand statues, inscriptions, and offerings. These tombs served as symbols of the emperor's eternal power, ensuring that his influence would endure long after death. The Roman tombs, like those of the Egyptians, were also designed to prevent the return of the dead to the world of the living. Seals and inscriptions warning of curses were common, reflecting the belief that the tomb was not just a physical structure but a spiritual barrier that kept the deceased from crossing back into the realm of the living. What is perhaps most striking about Roman tombs, however, is the way in which they reflect the Roman belief in the divine nature of the emperor. The emperor was seen as a god on earth, and his tomb was constructed to reflect his divine status. These tombs were often decorated with images of the emperor as a god, seated on a throne, surrounded by divine symbols. The tomb was not just a final resting place, it was a manifestation of the emperor's eternal power and divine nature. In this way, Roman tombs were not just for the dead, they were for the living as well, serving as a reminder of the emperor's divine authority and ensuring that his legacy would continue to shape the empire long after his death. This concept of tombs as symbols of power and protection can be found across cultures, from the grandiose tombs of the Egyptian pharaohs to the intricate burial mounds of the Celts. What sets these tombs apart is not just their physical grandeur but the deep spiritual beliefs that guided their construction. These tombs were built with a profound understanding of death as a powerful force, one that required careful handling, respect, and protection. The dead were not simply laid to rest, they were sent on a journey, one that needed to be guided and protected to ensure their safe passage into the afterlife. And yet, despite the elaborate designs and protective measures, many tombs were ultimately violated. Tomb robbers, drawn by the wealth and power contained within these sacred spaces, often sought to plunder the tombs, risking not just their lives but also the wrath of the gods. The tombs themselves were built with the understanding that death was not an end, but a transformation. The violation of a tomb was seen as a disruption of this transformation, a disturbance of the sacred space that would have dire consequences for both the living and the dead. The tombs, therefore, were not just physical spaces but spiritual battlegrounds, places where the forces of life and death clashed, and where the power of the deceased was both guarded and respected. As modern-day archaeologists uncover these ancient tombs, they are forced to confront not just the physical remnants of the past but also the deep spiritual and cultural beliefs that shaped these burial practices. These tombs, built with such care and reverence, continue to reveal insights into the ways in which ancient cultures viewed death, the afterlife, and the spiritual forces that govern both. The more we uncover, the more we realize that these tombs were not simply places to bury the dead, they were powerful spiritual spaces that connected the living with the dead, that sought to protect the deceased from harm, and that were designed to ensure that the dead continued to exert influence on the world of the living long after they had passed. In this sense, the tombs we uncover today are more than just archaeological sites, they are windows into the past, offering us a glimpse into the minds of the people who constructed them and the deep spiritual beliefs that guided their construction. They remind us that death is not an end but a powerful force that shapes our lives, our beliefs, and our understanding of the world around us. As we continue to explore these ancient tombs, we are reminded of the deep connection between the living and the dead, and the role that tombs have played throughout history in preserving not just the physical remains of the deceased, but the spiritual essence of those who came before us. The mysteries they hold continue to captivate us, as we seek to uncover the truths that lie buried within these sacred spaces. The fascination with tombs and burial practices transcends mere archaeological curiosity, it is a deep, almost instinctual pull towards understanding what lies beyond the veil of death. For ancient civilizations, tombs were not simply places to house the dead, but powerful sanctuaries, often shrouded in rituals and mysticism, designed to ensure safe passage into the afterlife and protect the deceased from malevolent forces. These ancient burial sites are sometimes as mysterious as they are grandiose, each one telling a story of culture, faith, and complex spiritual beliefs that have long since vanished. However, despite the centuries that separate us from these ancient worlds, the tombs remain as silent witnesses to a forgotten era, still holding secrets and unanswered questions about the way their creators viewed life, death, and everything that lay in between. Among the most striking of these tombs are those found in the ancient cultures of South America, specifically the burial sites of the Moche people of Peru. These tombs, unearthed over the years by archaeologists, have revealed some of the most elaborate and disturbing burial rituals ever discovered. The Moche people, who flourished between 100 and 800 AD, created burial mounds that were far more than just graves, they were complex ritualistic spaces, designed to honor the dead in a way that blended the realms of the living and the spiritual. In the case of the Moche elite, their tombs often contained not only the remains of the deceased but also a collection of ceremonial objects, pottery, and, most notably, human sacrifices. The graves of the Moche warriors, rulers, and priests were frequently accompanied by evidence of sacrificial ceremonies, where individuals were ritually slaughtered and placed alongside the deceased as offerings meant to ensure safe passage to the afterlife. These disturbing rituals were rooted in the belief that the soul required both material possessions and spiritual offerings to survive in the next life. What makes these tombs particularly unsettling, however, is not just the practice of human sacrifice, but the sheer scale of the rituals and the complexity of the burial rites. In some of the most elaborately designed tombs, such as those found at the Huaca de la Luna site in Peru, archaeologists discovered that the deceased were buried in elaborate chambers, surrounded by intricate artwork and pottery depicting scenes of warfare and sacrifice. These depictions were not mere embellishments, they were integral to the burial process, serving as both offerings to the gods and representations of the life the deceased had lived. The Moche believed that the afterlife was not a peaceful, quiet realm, but a place where the dead would need to fight for survival. As such, their tombs were designed as fortresses, spaces where the deceased could continue their struggle, protected by the gods and their companions, as they transitioned into the next world. This idea of the afterlife as a battleground is not unique to the Moche. In fact, many ancient cultures viewed the afterlife as a dangerous, contested space, one where the deceased had to fight, prove their worth, and earn their place among the gods. In ancient Egypt, for instance, the tombs of pharaohs were filled with not only gold and precious items, but also weapons, tools, and even soldiers' tombs to accompany the ruler into the next world. These items were meant to ensure that the deceased ruler would not only have what they needed to survive, but also retain their power and status, even in the afterlife. The Egyptian belief system was centered around the idea that death was just another phase of existence, a transition into another realm where the soul would continue its journey. But the afterlife, as the Egyptians saw it, was not a place of eternal peace. It was a place where the deceased would encounter various trials, including encounters with malevolent forces, which they would need to overcome in order to achieve immortality. This duality of death, both as an end and a transition into an ongoing battle for the soul, also appears in the tombs of ancient Mesopotamia. The Sumerians, for example, constructed elaborate tombs for their kings and high priests, with lavish items buried alongside the dead, including jewelry, pottery, and weapons. But what is most striking about the tombs of the Sumerians and later civilizations in Mesopotamia is the sheer amount of effort placed into protecting the deceased from the spirits of the underworld. According to Sumerian beliefs, the underworld was a dark and frightening place where the souls of the dead faced judgment and could be subjected to torture. In order to ensure a safe passage, the tombs of the elite were filled with protective items, amulets, and inscriptions meant to ward off evil spirits. The Sumerians, like the Egyptians, believed that the dead needed to be equipped for battle, though this battle was not one fought with swords and shields, but with spiritual fortitude. The Mesopotamian tradition of preparing the dead for such a journey is perhaps best seen in the famous Royal Cemetery at Ur, where the tombs of Sumerian kings were found filled with incredible treasures and sacrificial remains. One of the most notable discoveries in these tombs was the presence of human sacrifices, similar to the Moche. In some instances, slaves were buried alongside their masters, believed to serve their rulers in the afterlife, much as they did during life. These sacrifices were intended to accompany the deceased on their journey and ensure they had everything they needed for the trials they would face in the afterlife. But beyond the physical offerings, these tombs were also filled with symbolic representations of life, wealth, and power, which were meant to maintain the deceased's status in the afterlife. The idea that the dead would need companions, both human and material, reflects a belief that death was a continuation of life, but one fraught with unknown dangers, where preparation was key to survival. The practice of placing human sacrifices in tombs raises profound questions about how ancient cultures viewed the boundaries between life and death. Was this a form of respect, or a desperate effort to control the afterlife? Perhaps both. Across the ancient world, from the tombs of the Moche to those of the Egyptians and Mesopotamians, human sacrifices were seen as essential to ensuring a safe passage for the deceased. In the case of the Moche, it was clear that the deceased rulers and warriors were seen as having the power to return from the afterlife, so their tombs were filled with offerings meant to safeguard against this possibility. The idea that the dead could have such influence over the living speaks to a deep fear of the unknown, a belief that death was not a finality but a continuation of existence in a realm where the forces of the living and the dead were in constant tension. But perhaps one of the most striking features of ancient tombs, and the burial practices associated with them, is the stark contrast between the lavishness of the burial sites and the fear that accompanied them. The Moche, for example, may have buried their rulers with gold and fine pottery, but these same tombs were designed with extreme caution, reflecting the anxiety of a culture that feared what might happen when the dead became too powerful. This tension between honor and fear, between the magnificence of the tomb and the need to guard against the dangers of death, is a recurring theme in many ancient burial practices. This fear and reverence for the afterlife are evident even in tombs found in places that were far removed from the grandiosity of the Moche or Egyptian burial traditions. In parts of ancient China, for instance, tombs were often surrounded by walls, moats, or other barriers to protect the dead from the return of evil spirits. In some cases, tombs were constructed so that they faced particular directions, aligned with celestial events, in order to secure a better passage for the soul. These tombs were not just physical spaces, they were constructed with the belief that death could affect the living, and that the spirits of the deceased could disrupt or even harm those who had not prepared properly. Through all these varied practices, one thing becomes abundantly clear: the tombs we unearth today are not merely places to bury the dead. They are, in many cases, intricate spiritual sanctuaries built with the understanding that death is not an end but a continuation, a transformation that requires careful management and constant vigilance. Whether in the form of human sacrifices, elaborate burial goods, or protective rituals, these tombs serve as powerful reminders that the boundaries between life and death were seen as fluid, and that death itself was both a mystery and a source of immense power. As archaeologists continue to uncover these sites, they reveal not only the material culture of ancient societies but the profound spiritual beliefs that governed their view of the world beyond the grave. The mysteries they hold are as unsettling as they are fascinating, and they continue to challenge our understanding of death, the afterlife, and the eternal bond between the living and the dead. The allure of ancient tombs is more than just a curiosity driven by historical intrigue. These burial sites hold an undeniable power, not just as archaeological wonders, but as gateways to understanding the complex beliefs, fears, and customs of long-lost civilizations. As humanity unearths these sacred resting places, it encounters not only the physical remains of the deceased but also the vivid stories of how death was understood and how the afterlife was perceived. In the ancient world, death was not viewed as the final end, but as a transition into another realm, one that required intricate preparations to ensure the safe passage of the deceased into the spiritual world. The tombs, therefore, were not just graves, they were spiritual fortresses, designed to safeguard the dead, and often by extension, the living. A striking example of such a belief system can be seen in the mysterious tombs of the ancient Etruscans, a civilization that flourished in what is now Italy before the rise of the Roman Empire. The Etruscans had a sophisticated and deeply religious culture, and their burial practices reflect their complex understanding of death and the afterlife. They believed in the continued existence of the soul after death, and their tombs were elaborate structures that often mimicked the homes of the living. The tombs were furnished with replicas of everyday objects, such as pottery, furniture, and even musical instruments, believing that these items would accompany the deceased into the afterlife. However, the Etruscan tombs also held deeper symbolism. The tombs were often adorned with frescoes and reliefs that depicted scenes from the deceased's life or scenes of their journey into the afterlife. The murals often showed the dead engaging in feasts, banquets, and even mythical journeys to the underworld, symbolizing their belief that death was a continuation of life. The most famous of these tombs is the Tomb of the Leopards at Tarquinia, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, known for its vivid murals depicting a banquet scene. These paintings offer a unique window into the Etruscan belief in life after death, illustrating the deceased surrounded by their loved ones, enjoying the same pleasures they had in life. This concept of life after death is not unique to the Etruscans but is a recurring theme across many ancient cultures. The belief in an afterlife that mirrors the physical world is a testament to the deep connection between the living and the dead, a bond that was reinforced through elaborate burial rituals and offerings. Yet, while these tombs speak of a peaceful continuation of life, they also reveal the Etruscans' belief in the dangers of the afterlife. The Etruscans were not naive in their perceptions of death. In fact, their tombs often contained elements designed to ward off evil spirits, as well as elaborate mechanisms to ensure the soul's safe passage. This duality, celebrating life in the afterlife while simultaneously preparing for the potential dangers of the unknown, reflects a deeply complex relationship with death, one that is seen in other ancient cultures as well. For example, the ancient Egyptians, renowned for their advanced understanding of the afterlife, also constructed tombs that were intended to both protect and empower the deceased. The Egyptian tombs, particularly those of the pharaohs, were designed to ensure that the soul of the dead would be able to pass into the afterlife and continue to serve the gods. However, the afterlife was not a realm of eternal rest, but a dangerous journey that required preparation and protection. Pharaohs were buried with vast quantities of treasure, including food, clothing, and weapons, as well as spells and incantations from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, meant to guide the deceased through the trials they would face. The tomb itself was a fortress, sealed with heavy stones, traps, and false doors, designed to protect the pharaoh from tomb robbers, who were believed to disrupt the soul's journey by disturbing the sacred space. What is especially intriguing about Egyptian burial practices is the belief in the resurrection of the body. The Egyptians placed great emphasis on the physical preservation of the body, believing that the soul could only reach its final resting place if the body remained intact. This belief led to the practice of mummification, an elaborate process that could take weeks to complete. The body was carefully embalmed and wrapped in linen, with the organs removed and stored in canopic jars. This process ensured that the body would be preserved for the soul's journey, allowing the deceased to reunite with their physical form in the afterlife. The tomb, in many ways, was seen as a microcosm of the world the deceased had left behind, and it was filled with items meant to ensure that the individual would be comfortable and well-equipped in the afterlife. Beyond Egypt, the belief in a continued existence after death also permeated the ancient cultures of Mesopotamia. In the land of Sumer, the first civilization to develop writing, the tombs were filled with offerings to ensure that the soul would be able to navigate the underworld. Sumerian kings and queens were buried with lavish amounts of treasure, as well as attendants, servants, and animals meant to accompany them in their afterlife. This is most famously seen in the royal cemetery at Ur, where numerous tombs were found containing not only the remains of the deceased but also the bodies of sacrificial victims. These sacrifices were intended to serve the deceased in the afterlife, either by guarding the tomb or providing companionship. The tombs were designed with spiritual protection in mind, as Sumerians believed that the afterlife was a realm fraught with danger, where the dead would face judgment by the gods. In addition to material offerings, many tombs from this period also contained inscriptions, texts meant to guide the deceased on their journey. The Sumerians, much like the Egyptians, believed that the soul would need to undergo trials in the afterlife, and the inscriptions on tombs were designed to aid in this process. These texts, often referred to as death incantations, were prayers or spells that invoked the gods to protect the deceased and ensure their safe passage. In this way, the tombs were not just physical structures, but spiritual maps, designed to guide the dead through the underworld and beyond. As we look across different cultures, the common thread of death as a transition rather than an end becomes clear. The tombs of the ancient world were more than just places for bodies, they were designed to be sanctuaries, spaces where the dead could be prepared for their journey into the afterlife. Whether through the lavishness of Egyptian tombs, the symbolic richness of Etruscan burial sites, or the protection offered by the Sumerians, these tombs reflect a shared understanding of death as a complex, multifaceted process. The afterlife was not a place of rest but a realm where the soul had to be protected, guided, and, in some cases, fortified with companions and material wealth. The tombs of the ancient world also reflect the enduring influence of these beliefs on the living. The construction of such elaborate burial sites was not just for the benefit of the deceased but for the benefit of those left behind. Tombs were sacred spaces that connected the living with the dead, creating a spiritual bridge between the two realms. In many ways, these tombs served as places of remembrance and veneration, where the living could honor their ancestors and seek guidance from the spirits of the departed. The presence of offerings and rituals within these tombs demonstrates the deep reverence that these cultures had for their dead, and their belief that death was not a final separation, but a continuation of life in another form. This concept of death as a transition and not an end is one that resonates deeply with our own cultural understandings of death today. While modern societies may not construct elaborate tombs or conduct grand rituals for the dead, the underlying belief in life after death, in some form, persists. The need for protection, guidance, and remembrance of the deceased continues to shape the ways we interact with death and the ways we honor those who have passed. In many ways, the tombs of the ancient world are time capsules, preserving not just the physical remains of the dead, but the beliefs and rituals that shaped their understanding of death, the afterlife, and the world beyond. Each tomb, from the Etruscan burial sites to the grand tombs of Egypt and Mesopotamia, tells a story of human effort and belief, revealing how cultures across time and space sought to control, protect, and understand the most mysterious of all human experiences, death. As we continue to explore these tombs, we uncover not only the material wealth of ancient civilizations but the profound spiritual legacy they left behind. As we continue our exploration of ancient tombs, it becomes clear that the more we uncover, the more we realize just how intricately they were designed to reflect the societies that built them. These tombs were not merely graves, they were profound cultural statements, filled with symbolism, rituals, and a deep understanding of the afterlife. The tombs we find today are not just about the remains of the deceased but are also windows into how ancient people viewed death, the soul, and their place in the cosmos. These burial sites served multiple purposes. They were sanctuaries meant to honor the deceased, protect their souls, and provide for their continued existence in another realm. The tombs, with their elaborate artifacts and rituals, reveal that death was not viewed as an end, but as a transition into another phase of life, one that required both material and spiritual preparation. Take, for example, the tombs of the ancient Chinese, particularly those of the Qin dynasty. The most famous of these tombs is that of the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, located near the modern-day city of Xi'an. This tomb complex is as mysterious as it is grand. The emperor's tomb, which has yet to be fully excavated, is believed to be filled with vast riches, including jewels, bronze weapons, and an army of life-sized clay soldiers, known as the Terracotta Army, created to accompany him in the afterlife. These soldiers were arranged in battle formations, each one unique, standing guard over the tomb to protect the emperor from any forces that might threaten his reign in the next life. But these soldiers were more than just symbolic protectors. They were intended to reflect the emperor's real-life army, reinforcing his power and status even in death. The concept of having an entire army at one's disposal in the afterlife speaks volumes about how the emperor, and by extension the culture, viewed death, as a continuation of earthly existence, where power, protection, and wealth would follow the individual into the next realm. The Terracotta Army also tells us something deeper about Chinese beliefs in immortality. For the Qin dynasty, the afterlife was a world that mirrored the earthly one, where the deceased would continue to need protection, status, and wealth. The army's purpose was to ensure that the emperor's soul would not only be safe but would also maintain its authority and power in the spiritual realm. This belief in the continuation of power is reflective of the imperial structure of Chinese society, where the emperor was seen as the son of heaven, a semi-divine figure who would be venerated even after death. The tomb, and the soldiers within it, were meant to guarantee that this veneration would continue, serving as both a protection and a reminder of the emperor's eternal influence. The belief that death was not the end but a continuation of life in another form is not confined to the Qin dynasty or even to ancient China. Across cultures, similar themes can be found in tombs, rituals, and burial practices. One of the most notable examples of this comes from ancient Greece, where the afterlife was a complex and multifaceted journey. The Greeks believed in an underworld ruled by Hades, where the souls of the dead would be judged and sent either to a peaceful existence in the Elysian fields or to a place of torment in Tartarus. But this afterlife was not a one-size-fits-all destination. It was shaped by how one lived in life, how they were remembered, and what offerings were made on their behalf after death. For the ancient Greeks, the tomb was a place where the soul was honored and provided for. Tombs were often accompanied by rituals, where family members would offer food, drink, and libations to ensure the deceased's soul would not suffer in the afterlife. These offerings, known as libations, were believed to sustain the soul, allowing it to continue its journey through the underworld. One of the most interesting aspects of Greek tombs is the way they were designed to reflect the living world. In the case of the wealthy and powerful, their tombs were often monumental structures, filled with inscriptions, statues, and elaborate artwork. These tombs were meant to preserve the memory of the deceased and ensure that they would continue to have an influence on the living world. The Greeks believed that the dead were not entirely removed from the world of the living, they could still interact with the living through their tombs, and their spirits could be invoked in times of need. This connection between the living and the dead was reinforced by the practice of creating tombs that served as a permanent tribute to the deceased. Whether in the form of grand statues or elaborate inscriptions, these tombs were designed to ensure that the deceased would be remembered, honored, and, in some cases, worshipped by the living. In some cases, the tombs were even designed to allow for the deceased to return from the afterlife. The idea that the dead could return was prevalent not only in Greece but also in other parts of the ancient world. The ancient Romans, for instance, had a similar belief in the power of tombs to protect and preserve the deceased. Roman tombs were often built to last, made of stone and marble, and often inscribed with messages to ensure that the deceased would be remembered and venerated by future generations. The Romans, however, took this concept a step further by constructing elaborate burial chambers known as mausoleums, which were grand enough to serve as lasting monuments to their wealth, status, and influence. The most famous of these is the Mausoleum of Hadrian, which still stands today as the Castel Sant'Angelo in Rome. The tomb was designed to ensure that Hadrian's legacy would endure forever, and his power would continue to resonate throughout history, even after his death. Roman tombs were often built to withstand the ravages of time, with massive structures that symbolized the lasting power of the emperor or nobleman buried within. These tombs were not just about honoring the dead, they were about reinforcing the living's connection to the deceased and ensuring that the deceased's influence would remain intact, both spiritually and materially. Like the Egyptians, the Romans believed that the soul of the dead required both material wealth and spiritual protection to ensure a peaceful afterlife. The idea that death was not an end but a continuation of power and influence is reflected in the grandeur of these tombs, which were designed to stand as lasting monuments to the deceased's achievements. The practice of creating grand tombs for the dead continued long into the Middle Ages and beyond, particularly in cultures where the influence of the church and religious beliefs dominated. In medieval Europe, for example, tombs were often constructed in churches, and they were richly adorned with religious imagery. These tombs served as a way to honor the deceased while also ensuring that their souls would be at peace in the afterlife. For the Christian faith, the afterlife was seen as a reward for a life well lived, and tombs were designed to reflect this belief, often adorned with symbols of salvation and eternal life. However, even in cultures where the religious influence of the church or other spiritual institutions was prominent, the idea of the tomb as a place of power and protection persisted. The tombs of saints, for example, became places of pilgrimage, where people would come to honor the deceased and seek blessings. These tombs were believed to possess divine power, as they held the remains of those who had lived virtuous lives. Pilgrims believed that by visiting these tombs, they could connect with the deceased spirit and receive spiritual favors. As we reflect on these ancient burial practices, a key theme emerges: the tomb is not just a place to bury the dead but a sacred space meant to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. Whether through elaborate burial goods, offerings, or the construction of grand monuments, these tombs were designed to ensure that the deceased would be honored, remembered, and protected as they transitioned into the afterlife. Across cultures and time periods, tombs served as powerful symbols of life's enduring connection with death. The dead were not left behind but were seen as continuing their journey, influencing the living world and maintaining their power and legacy. The tombs themselves were not merely physical spaces, but spiritual portals, places where the boundary between the living and the dead was blurred, where power, influence, and memory were preserved. These burial sites serve as a profound reminder that, throughout history, death was not an end but a continuation of a journey. And even in our modern world, as we reflect on these tombs, we are reminded of the deep connections that still bind the living to the dead. Each tomb, from the grand mausoleums of ancient Rome to the simple burial mounds of the Celts, speaks to a shared human experience, the desire to ensure that the memory of the deceased lives on, that their legacy continues, and that their influence never truly fades. The fascination with ancient tombs transcends mere archaeological curiosity. These burial sites serve as powerful reminders of the beliefs, values, and aspirations of long-lost civilizations, offering a unique glimpse into how our ancestors understood death and the afterlife. The tombs we uncover today are not just physical resting places for the deceased, they are intricate spiritual sanctuaries, designed to guide, protect, and honor those who have passed. As we continue to explore these ancient burial sites, we find that they were built with a profound understanding of death not as an end, but as a transformative journey, one that required careful preparation, spiritual protection, and material offerings. In exploring the tombs of ancient cultures, it is impossible to overlook the staggering level of craftsmanship and thought that went into their construction. These tombs were designed to reflect the worldviews of the societies that created them, and to offer protection for the deceased as they transitioned into another realm. Many of these tombs, whether humble or grand, contain offerings of food, clothing, tools, and even human sacrifices. These items were believed to serve as necessities for the soul's journey, ensuring that the deceased had everything they needed for the trials and challenges of the afterlife. Some tombs, especially those of the elite, are filled with treasures that speak not only to the wealth of the deceased but to the society's deep reverence for the continuity of the soul. A perfect example of this can be seen in the tombs of the ancient Maya civilization, located in present-day Mexico and Central America. The Maya had a rich and complex belief system, one that revolved around cycles of life, death, and rebirth. The Maya believed that death was not the end, but a transition into the underworld, known as Xibalba. Their tombs reflect this belief, with many of them designed to mirror the sacred landscapes of the living world. The Maya constructed elaborate tombs for their rulers, often placing them inside pyramids or temple structures. These tombs were filled with rich offerings, such as jade, ceramics, and other precious materials. Additionally, many tombs also contained evidence of human sacrifice, a practice that was deeply rooted in Maya religion. These sacrifices were intended to appease the gods and ensure the safe passage of the ruler's soul into the afterlife. One of the most notable Maya tombs is the tomb of the Maya ruler Pakal the Great, found in the Temple of the Inscriptions at Palenque. Pakal's tomb, discovered in 1952, is a monumental example of Maya burial practices. The tomb contained a vast array of treasures, including jade jewelry, carved stone objects, and a sarcophagus with a richly decorated lid. The lid of the sarcophagus depicts Pakal himself, surrounded by symbols of the underworld and the heavens. The imagery on the tomb's lid suggests that Pakal's journey into the afterlife would be one of transformation, as he traveled through the realms of the gods and emerged as an immortal being. This belief in the ruler's immortality is also reflected in the architecture of the tomb, with the pyramid itself acting as a symbolic representation of the ruler's journey through death and into the afterlife. The Maya believed that the deceased could influence the living world, and this is reflected in the elaborate tombs they built. Tombs were not merely places of burial, they were seen as portals that allowed the deceased to remain connected to the living. For the Maya, the tomb was a sacred space where the deceased could continue to exert influence over the living, guiding them through dreams, rituals, and offerings. The tombs were designed to reflect the journey the soul would take in the afterlife, with intricate carvings, paintings, and sculptures depicting the passage from life to death, and beyond. The idea that death is a transition rather than an end can also be found in the tombs of the ancient Egyptians. Perhaps the most famous examples of Egyptian tombs are the pyramids of Giza, which were built for the pharaohs to ensure their safe passage into the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that the soul of the deceased, known as the Ka, would require sustenance and protection during its journey into the afterlife. To ensure this, pharaohs were buried with vast quantities of treasure, including food, jewelry, and even weapons. But the tombs were more than just repositories for goods, they were carefully constructed to act as spiritual fortresses. The pyramid itself was seen as a means of protecting the soul, with its shape symbolizing the rays of the sun, which were believed to guide the deceased into the afterlife. Inside these tombs, one would find inscriptions from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which contained a series of spells and prayers designed to protect the soul and help it navigate the dangerous underworld. The tombs also contained false doors and hidden chambers, which were thought to keep malevolent spirits at bay. These protective measures, combined with the material wealth found in the tombs, highlight the Egyptian belief in the ongoing struggle between life and death. For the Egyptians, death was not a final separation, but a continuation of life in a different form. The tombs were designed to ensure that the soul would have the necessary tools, resources, and protection to thrive in the afterlife. In addition to the elaborate burial goods, Egyptian tombs were often decorated with scenes of the deceased's life, as well as images of gods, animals, and symbols associated with the afterlife. These images were not just artistic representations, they were thought to serve as magical protections, ensuring that the deceased would be well cared for in the afterlife. The tombs of the elite were often filled with rich depictions of the deceased's family, servants, and animals, all of whom were thought to accompany the soul into the afterlife. These depictions not only helped the deceased remain connected to the living world but also reinforced the belief that the soul would need companions and sustenance on its journey through the afterlife. The Egyptian tombs, like those of the Maya, were designed as gateways between the living and the dead. The idea of the tomb as a portal was central to many ancient belief systems, with the tomb serving as a space where the boundary between the two realms was blurred. The deceased were not seen as completely separated from the living. Instead, they continued to exist in a spiritual form, and their presence could still be felt through offerings, prayers, and rituals. These tombs, whether they were massive pyramids or simple burial mounds, were designed to ensure that the deceased would continue to have an influence on the world of the living, even after their physical bodies had passed. This theme of death as a continuation of life is not limited to the ancient Maya and Egyptians. Across the world, from Mesopotamia to the ancient Celts, the tombs we uncover tell the same story: death is a transition, not an end. Whether through burial mounds, sacrificial rituals, or elaborate burial goods, these tombs reflect a profound understanding that death is not the ultimate end of the soul but rather a transformation into another realm. In many cultures, death was not feared, but respected as a powerful force, one that could bring about both destruction and renewal. The tombs themselves acted as symbols of this duality, where death was both a gateway and a battleground, and where the deceased could continue their influence over the world of the living. Even in the modern world, the legacy of these ancient tombs continues to influence the way we view death and the afterlife. In many cultures, tombs remain sacred spaces where the dead are honored and remembered. Whether through elaborate memorials, small personal altars, or community rituals, the idea that the deceased continue to play a role in the lives of the living endures. These tombs, just like those of ancient times, serve as powerful reminders that death is not an isolated event but a part of a larger cycle, a cycle that connects the living, the dead, and the beyond. As we continue to unearth the tombs of ancient civilizations, we are reminded of the depth of human understanding and imagination that went into their creation. These tombs are not just physical spaces, they are spiritual constructs, designed to ensure that the dead would continue their journey, with all the protection, respect, and honor they deserved. Each tomb, from the grand pyramids of Egypt to the more humble burial sites of the Maya and the Celts, tells the story of a society that believed in the continuity of life beyond death, and in the power of the tomb as a gateway between the worlds. It is through these tombs that we gain insight not just into the past, but into the universal human desire to transcend death, to ensure that our legacy lives on, and to connect with those who have gone before us. Throughout history, the construction of tombs has been a practice steeped in symbolism, culture, and spiritual significance. From the grand tombs of ancient Egypt to the secretive burial sites of distant cultures, tombs were not simply places to bury the dead. Instead, they were sacred spaces designed to ensure that the deceased would make a safe and prosperous journey into the afterlife. These burial sites were crafted with the belief that death was not the end, but a transition into another form of existence, one that required spiritual protection, material offerings, and careful planning to ensure that the soul would be able to navigate the dangers of the afterlife. Perhaps no tomb is more emblematic of this belief than the famous tomb of King Tutankhamun, the young pharaoh of ancient Egypt. Discovered by British archaeologist Howard Carter in 1922, Tutankhamun's tomb was one of the most significant archaeological finds of the 20th century, offering a glimpse into the wealth, power, and religious beliefs of the ancient Egyptians. Despite being the tomb of a relatively minor pharaoh, King Tut's tomb contained a staggering array of treasures, including gold jewelry, chariots, and intricate burial masks. These treasures were not intended simply for the display of wealth, but were meant to accompany Tutankhamun on his journey into the afterlife, ensuring that he would have everything he needed for a successful transition. The tomb was filled with symbolic items, each chosen for its spiritual significance. Among the most famous of these artifacts is the iconic golden burial mask, which depicts the young king's face in exquisite detail. The mask is not merely a depiction of his physical appearance, but a representation of his eternal life. In ancient Egyptian belief, the soul of the deceased was thought to need a physical form in the afterlife in order to recognize itself. The mask, with its realistic features, was believed to help Tutankhamun's soul reconnect with his body and retain his identity in the afterlife. In addition to the golden mask, Tutankhamun's tomb contained a vast array of other items meant to aid him in the afterlife. These included chariots, weapons, musical instruments, and even food and wine. The Egyptians believed that the deceased would need these items to sustain themselves in the afterlife, much as they did in the physical world. These offerings were intended to ensure that the deceased would not go hungry or thirsty in the afterlife, and would have the tools they needed to navigate the challenges of the spiritual realm. The tomb also contained a series of protective spells and prayers, inscribed on the walls of the burial chamber, which were designed to help Tutankhamun overcome the dangers he might encounter after death. The treasures found within Tutankhamun's tomb reflect the ancient Egyptian belief in the continued existence of the soul, and the importance of preparing for death. The Egyptians did not view death as a final end, but as a transition into a new phase of existence. In this belief, the tomb was not merely a place to bury the body, but a portal to the afterlife, a space where the deceased could be protected and sustained during their journey. The tomb was designed as a spiritual sanctuary, where the dead could continue to live in comfort and security, just as they had during their time on earth. The elaborate burial goods found within Tutankhamun's tomb are a testament to this belief, illustrating the importance of preparing for the afterlife and ensuring that the deceased would be well equipped for the challenges they would face. The significance of tombs as sacred spaces, designed to ensure the successful passage of the deceased into the afterlife, is not unique to ancient Egypt. Across the world, tombs have been constructed with similar purpose and intention, reflecting the diverse ways in which cultures understand death, the soul, and the afterlife. One of the most fascinating examples of this is the tombs of the ancient Chinese, particularly those of the Qin dynasty. The most famous of these tombs is that of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, whose burial site is guarded by the famous terracotta army. The tomb of Qin Shi Huang, discovered in 1974, is one of the most awe-inspiring archaeological sites in the world. The emperor's tomb is surrounded by an army of thousands of life-sized clay soldiers, each one individually crafted and arranged in military formations. These soldiers, along with the chariots, weapons, and other artifacts found within the tomb, were meant to serve as guardians for the emperor in the afterlife. Just as the pharaohs of Egypt believed that the deceased would need to be accompanied by their belongings and servants, Qin Shi Huang believed that his soul would require an army to protect it as it made its way through the spiritual realm. The terracotta army is not just a display of military power, but a representation of the emperor's belief in the continuity of life after death. The soldiers were created to ensure that Qin Shi Huang's soul would be protected, just as his army had protected him in life. The emperor's tomb, like those of the ancient Egyptians, was designed to be a spiritual fortress, where the dead could continue to live in power and safety. The vast array of offerings found in the tomb, including bronze weapons, chariots, and precious treasures, illustrates the emperor's belief that death was not the end, but a continuation of his reign in the afterlife. Like the Egyptians, the ancient Chinese believed that the deceased required material goods and spiritual protection to ensure their successful journey into the afterlife. Qin Shi Huang's tomb, with its massive terracotta army and its vast array of treasures, reflects the same beliefs about death and the afterlife that we see in the tombs of Egypt. The tomb was not just a burial site, it was a powerful spiritual construct, designed to protect and preserve the emperor's soul for eternity. The belief in the afterlife as a continuation of life is also found in the burial practices of the ancient Mesopotamians. The tombs of the Sumerians, Akkadians, and Babylonians were filled with a wealth of offerings, including food, jewelry, and weapons, all intended to accompany the deceased into the afterlife. The Sumerians, in particular, believed that the soul of the deceased would need assistance in navigating the underworld, and so their tombs were filled with objects that would provide for their needs. Much like the ancient Egyptians and Chinese, the Sumerians believed that death was not an end, but a journey that required preparation. One of the most famous examples of Sumerian tombs is the royal cemetery at Ur, where a number of elaborate burial sites were discovered. The tombs at Ur were filled with incredible wealth, including gold and silver jewelry, ceremonial items, and even the remains of human sacrifices. The Sumerians believed that these sacrifices were necessary to ensure the safe passage of the soul into the afterlife, and that the deceased would need these offerings to survive in the underworld. The elaborate nature of these tombs speaks to the importance placed on the afterlife in Sumerian society, and the belief that death was just another phase of existence, one that required careful preparation and protection. Similar beliefs about the afterlife and the importance of preparing for death can be seen in the tombs of other ancient civilizations, including the Celts, the Maya, and the ancient Greeks. Across cultures and time periods, tombs were constructed not just to bury the dead, but to provide for their spiritual needs and ensure that they would be able to continue their existence in another realm. The presence of offerings, sacrifices, and protective symbols in these tombs reflects the belief that death was not an end, but a transformation, a continuation of the soul's journey, requiring both material and spiritual support. In many ways, the tombs of ancient civilizations serve as time capsules, preserving not only the physical remains of the dead but also the spiritual beliefs of the living. The treasures, rituals, and offerings found within these tombs speak to a deep human desire to transcend death and ensure that the legacy of the deceased would continue. Whether through the lavish tombs of the pharaohs, the vast armies of terracotta soldiers, or the elaborate burial goods of the Sumerians, these tombs reflect a shared belief in the afterlife as a continuation of life, a belief that death is not a final separation, but a transition into another form of existence, where the soul requires protection, sustenance, and guidance. As we uncover these tombs, we gain not only a deeper understanding of the cultures that built them, but also a greater appreciation for the universal human desire to transcend mortality and ensure that the spirit of the deceased lives on forever. As we continue our deep dive into the world of ancient tombs, we begin to understand that these burial sites serve not only as markers of where the dead rest but as profound statements about the societies that built them. Tombs were the final, sacred space for the deceased, a domain where the dead could continue their journey into the afterlife. These places were not just designed for the physical remains of the departed, they were created to protect the soul, to ensure a prosperous continuation beyond the realm of the living. Tombs, in their many forms, provide a window into how ancient civilizations viewed life, death, and everything that lay beyond. One of the most fascinating aspects of tomb construction is the relationship between the dead and the living. In many ancient cultures, the tomb was not seen as a final farewell but as a place that maintained a strong connection between the realms of the living and the dead. It was believed that the dead continued to exert influence on the world of the living, whether through ancestral worship, spiritual protection, or even active participation in the affairs of the living. This connection was central to the way tombs were constructed, the types of offerings placed within them, and the rituals performed around them. These tombs were meant to bridge the gap between two worlds, ensuring that the deceased remained present, active, and influential long after their physical bodies had decayed. For the ancient Greeks, tombs were often places of reverence and reflection, where the living could visit to honor their ancestors. The Greeks believed in an afterlife, though it was not as vividly described as in other cultures. The underworld was a dark and shadowy place ruled by Hades, where souls wandered without purpose unless they had performed great deeds in life. Therefore, the tombs of the Greeks, though often simple, were designed to honor the deceased and ensure that their souls would be remembered. Many Greek tombs were inscribed with epigrams, short poems, or inscriptions that celebrated the life of the deceased and invoked prayers for their peaceful afterlife. These tombs were often located outside city walls, where the dead could be kept in a space that was physically removed from the living but still acknowledged through visits and offerings. The importance of remembrance is key in Greek funerary practices. Tombs were adorned with statues, busts, and other representations of the deceased. These images were meant to capture the essence of the person in life, providing a permanent representation of their identity and ensuring that they would not be forgotten. Greek tombs were sometimes surrounded by elaborate gardens or small shrines where offerings of food, wine, and incense were left. These rituals were intended to nourish the deceased spirit and provide them with sustenance on their journey through the underworld. In this way, the tomb became a space where the living could connect with the dead, seeking their guidance or asking for protection. The belief that the tomb was a place for the living to interact with the deceased is echoed in the tombs of the ancient Romans. The Romans were known for their elaborate burial practices, which often involved constructing elaborate mausoleums and tombs for their dead. These tombs were not just burial sites, they were intended to act as lasting monuments to the individual, places where the deceased could be honored and remembered by future generations. Much like the Greeks, the Romans believed that death was a transition, not an end. The soul of the deceased continued to live on in another realm, and it was essential to ensure that the spirit had the necessary protections and comforts to navigate the afterlife. Roman tombs were often constructed along major roads and highways, allowing for easy access by family members and passers-by. These tombs took many forms, from simple stone markers to grand marble structures. The most famous of these tombs is the Mausoleum of Augustus, a massive circular tomb built for the Roman Emperor Augustus. This mausoleum was designed not only to serve as the final resting place for the emperor but also as a symbol of his power and authority. The grandeur of Roman tombs reflected the Romans' view of death as a continuation of their status and influence. The dead were not only remembered but also venerated, their tombs acting as a lasting legacy to their accomplishments in life. The tombs of the Romans were often adorned with inscriptions, and it was common to find elaborate epitaphs that celebrated the achievements of the deceased. These inscriptions were not just memorials but were seen as a way to ensure the continued presence of the individual's spirit. The Romans believed that the soul could continue to interact with the living world through its tomb, offering guidance, protection, or even seeking retribution for wrongdoings. In a sense, these tombs were a way of maintaining the authority and presence of the deceased, allowing them to continue to influence the living world long after their death. Much like the Greeks, the Romans believed that offerings and rituals were essential in helping the soul transition to the afterlife. These offerings ranged from food and wine to small tokens and personal items, all meant to ensure that the soul had the necessary resources to navigate the challenges of the afterlife. The belief that the soul could continue to interact with the living world was further reinforced by the practice of creating tombs in prominent locations, by roads, in cities, or near places of power. This allowed for easy access by the living, who could visit the tomb to offer prayers or seek guidance from the spirit of the deceased. While the Greeks and Romans believed in a form of afterlife, the tombs of ancient Egypt offer a much more elaborate and detailed view of what life after death would entail. The ancient Egyptians had a complex belief system that saw the afterlife as an eternal continuation of life on earth, a place where the soul could enjoy comfort, wealth, and power as it had during its time on earth. Egyptian tombs were, therefore, among the most elaborate ever constructed, reflecting their belief that the soul would need material possessions and spiritual protection to thrive in the afterlife. The tomb of Tutankhamun, for instance, serves as a prime example of this belief. Discovered in 1922 by archaeologist Howard Carter, the tomb was filled with treasures and artifacts, each chosen to provide for the young king's journey into the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that the soul, or Ka, would require a physical form to recognize itself in the afterlife, which is why Tutankhamun was buried with a golden mask that closely resembled his face. The mask was not just a depiction of the king, it was meant to serve as a means for his soul to recognize its own image and identity as it transitioned to the next world. Inside Tutankhamun's tomb, there were countless other items designed to provide for the king's spiritual and physical needs in the afterlife. These included clothing, food, chariots, weapons, and jewelry, items that were thought to offer both comfort and protection. The belief that death was not an end but a transition into another phase of existence is also evident in the way the tombs were constructed. Egyptian tombs were designed to act as spiritual fortresses, protecting the soul from malevolent forces and ensuring that it could travel safely to the afterlife. Tombs in ancient Egypt were not only about wealth and physical offerings, they were deeply imbued with religious significance. The walls of many Egyptian tombs were adorned with intricate paintings and inscriptions from the Book of the Dead, a text that contained spells and prayers to guide the soul through the afterlife. These texts offered protection and advice, helping the deceased to avoid dangers and find peace in the realm of the dead. The Book of the Dead was not just a set of religious instructions, it was a practical guide for navigating the afterlife, ensuring that the deceased would have the tools to overcome the trials they might face. What makes these tombs especially fascinating is their spiritual and symbolic role in the ancient world. They were not merely final resting places, they were sacred spaces, constructed with the belief that the dead would continue their existence in a different form. These tombs served as both memorials and gateways to the afterlife, places where the living could honor the dead and seek to maintain their presence and influence in the world. The connection between the living and the dead was maintained through offerings, rituals, and memorials, allowing the deceased to continue to influence the world long after their physical departure. As we reflect on these ancient tombs and burial practices, we are reminded of the deep human desire to understand and control death. Across cultures and time periods, tombs were built with the belief that death was not the end but a transition into another realm, a realm that required careful preparation, protection, and reverence. Whether in ancient Egypt, Greece, Rome, or elsewhere, the construction of tombs was a deeply spiritual act, one that served to honor the deceased and ensure their continued presence in the world of the living. These tombs, in all their forms and complexities, serve as a powerful reminder that death is not a final separation but a continuation of life's journey. As we explore further into the realm of ancient tombs, it becomes clear that these sites were much more than places of final rest, they were monumental acts of faith, reflection, and a profound desire for continuity. Tombs were carefully crafted spaces designed to ensure that the deceased would be protected, honored, and remembered long after their passing. The art of burial was deeply intertwined with each civilization's understanding of life, death, and the afterlife. Across different cultures, tombs were built with the belief that death was not an end, but a transition into another existence, one that required not only physical protection but also spiritual sustenance and respect. In the ancient world, tombs were more than just structures to house the dead, they were symbols of power, immortality, and a continuing connection between the living and the deceased. The construction of these tombs involved a meticulous understanding of architecture, religion, and the supernatural. For many ancient cultures, the belief in an afterlife was central to their worldview, and the tomb was seen as a gateway to that new existence. The tombs were not just final resting places, they were thought to be active spaces, portals between the realms of the living and the dead. These sacred spaces were carefully planned and constructed to serve as sanctuaries for the deceased, protecting their soul from malevolent forces and ensuring their continued influence over the world of the living. One of the most powerful representations of this belief comes from the ancient Egyptians. In their worldview, death was merely a transition from one world to another, and it was vital to ensure that the deceased was properly equipped for this journey. The tomb was viewed as a crucial element in this process, designed to provide the deceased with everything needed for a comfortable and safe passage into the afterlife. The Egyptians built vast and elaborate tombs, often filled with treasures, food, and even the remains of servants, all intended to sustain the soul in its journey. The tomb itself was also designed with protective elements, such as intricate corridors, false doors, and hidden chambers, all of which were meant to guard against any threats from evil spirits or tomb robbers. The most famous Egyptian tombs are, of course, the pyramids, particularly those at Giza. These colossal structures were not merely tombs for the pharaohs, they were intended to be grand symbols of the king's divine status and eternal rule. The pyramids were designed to align with the stars, ensuring that the pharaoh's soul would have a direct connection to the divine after death. The shape of the pyramid itself, with its pointed top, was meant to represent the rays of the sun, helping the king's soul to ascend to the heavens and join the gods. The burial chamber within the pyramid was intricately designed to house the deceased, and it often contained offerings to ensure that the king's soul would be sustained in the afterlife. Within the pyramid, the burial chamber was typically filled with goods such as furniture, food, weapons, and even large statues that represented the deceased servants. These items were not simply meant to honor the king's life on earth but to equip him for a successful existence in the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that the soul, or ka, would require material goods to survive and thrive in the afterlife, and these offerings were meant to ensure that the king would continue to enjoy the comforts and privileges of his life even after death. The tomb, therefore, was not just a burial site but a carefully curated space designed to guarantee the pharaoh's continued reign, even in the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that the soul would face many challenges on its journey through the afterlife. The Book of the Dead, a collection of spells and prayers, was often inscribed on the tomb walls to guide the deceased through these trials. The texts helped the soul navigate the perilous journey to the afterlife, ensuring that it would be able to avoid the dangers of the underworld and reach the realm of the gods. The Egyptians also believed in the importance of judgment in the afterlife. The soul would be weighed against a feather representing truth and justice, and only those deemed worthy would be allowed to enter the eternal paradise. This belief in judgment and the need for divine protection and sustenance was central to Egyptian tomb construction. The tomb itself was not only a resting place but a sanctuary, a space where the dead were ensured safe passage and continued protection by the gods. The Egyptian approach to tomb construction and burial practices was not unique in its belief in the importance of preparing for the afterlife. The ancient Greeks, too, saw death as a transition into another realm. However, their view of the afterlife was different. While the Egyptians envisioned an eternal existence filled with comfort and power, the Greeks believed in a shadowy, somewhat bleak afterlife in the underworld, ruled by Hades. In contrast to the Egyptians, the Greeks did not believe that the soul would continue to live in luxury, but rather that it would exist in a quiet, isolated world. Despite this, Greek tombs were still designed with great care and reverence. Greek tombs were often adorned with sculptures and inscriptions, designed not just to honor the deceased but to ensure that their memory would live on. For the Greeks, the act of burial was as much about the living as it was about the dead. The tomb served as a memorial, a way for the living to remember their loved ones and ensure that their legacy endured. The inscriptions on Greek tombs often celebrated the virtues of the deceased, focusing on their achievements, their character, and their contributions to society. In this way, the tomb served as both a place of rest for the soul and a way for the deceased to continue to have an impact on the world of the living. In ancient Greece, the practice of offering sacrifices and food to the dead was also common. Libations of wine and offerings of food were made to nourish the souls of the deceased, ensuring that they would be content in the afterlife. This practice was seen as a way to maintain the connection between the living and the dead, with the tomb acting as a bridge between the two worlds. The Greeks also believed in the importance of rituals and ceremonies to honor the dead. These rituals were performed to appease the gods and ensure that the souls of the deceased would rest peacefully. These tombs were not just places to bury the dead but sacred spaces where the living could interact with the dead, maintain their memory, and ensure that their influence continued. While the ancient Egyptians and Greeks had a well-defined belief in the afterlife, the ancient Chinese had a different approach, rooted in ancestor worship and the belief in the continuing presence of the deceased. The tombs of the ancient Chinese were designed to honor the dead and ensure that their spirits would continue to protect and guide the living. One of the most famous examples of this is the tomb of Emperor Qin Shi Huang, located near the city of Xi'an. This tomb is perhaps best known for the terracotta army, a vast army of life-sized clay soldiers that stand guard over the emperor's burial site. The soldiers, along with other offerings found in the tomb, were meant to protect the emperor's soul and ensure his continued power in the afterlife. The terracotta army was not just a symbol of the emperor's military might, but also a reflection of the Chinese belief in the power of the dead to influence the living world. The tomb of Qin Shi Huang was designed as a miniature version of his empire, with soldiers, horses, and chariots arranged in military formations, ready to accompany the emperor into the afterlife. The emperor's tomb, like those of other ancient rulers, was a reflection of his status and his belief in the continuation of his reign even after death. The emperor's soul was thought to need protection, and the army of soldiers was meant to serve as a safeguard, ensuring that he would continue to rule and protect his people, even in the afterlife. This belief in the power of the dead to influence the living world is also evident in the tombs of other ancient cultures, including the Maya, the Romans, and the Celts. Across the globe, tombs were constructed not just to house the dead but to ensure that their souls would continue to interact with the living world, offering protection, guidance, or even retribution. Tombs were seen as powerful spiritual spaces, where the living could honor the dead and maintain a connection to their ancestors. As we reflect on the construction and purpose of ancient tombs, we see a common thread running through all these cultures: the belief that death was not the end, but a transition to another existence. Whether through elaborate tombs filled with treasures, protective statues, or inscriptions, these burial sites served as sanctuaries for the deceased, ensuring that they were properly equipped for their journey into the afterlife. These tombs were not just resting places, they were active spaces, designed to protect, honor, and preserve the legacy of the deceased. The rituals, offerings, and architecture that filled these tombs are a testament to the enduring human desire to transcend death, to ensure that those who passed would continue to play a role in the world of the living, and to maintain a connection with the past that would span generations. As we continue our exploration of ancient tombs and the fascinating burial practices of civilizations past, one theme becomes undeniable: the relationship between death and the living was not a mere separation but a fluid and ongoing connection. Tombs, in every sense, were far more than simple graves. They were spiritual gateways, designed to protect and nourish the soul on its journey beyond the physical world. Ancient cultures, from the Egyptians to the Chinese, from the Greeks to the Maya, saw tombs as vital to maintaining the balance between the living and the dead, creating spaces that would continue to serve the deceased long after their bodies had decayed. These tombs not only housed the dead but were designed to serve as active, dynamic places where the deceased's soul could continue to influence the living world. The careful construction of tombs often reflected the complexity of these civilizations' religious beliefs and their deep understanding of the afterlife. To these cultures, death was not seen as the ultimate end of existence, but as a transformation, a necessary passage that required preparation, protection, and guidance. The tombs themselves acted as the first line of defense in this spiritual journey, ensuring that the deceased would not face danger in the afterlife and that their legacy would live on. Each culture, with its unique understanding of life and death, designed its tombs to reflect its worldview and spiritual needs, from the grand, monumental pyramids of Egypt to the quiet, understated burial mounds of the ancient Celts. In ancient Egypt, the belief in a thriving, eternal afterlife was foundational to burial practices. The tombs of the pharaohs were designed to reflect not only their divine status but also the belief in the continuation of their reign beyond death. These tombs were elaborate and well protected, often constructed with multiple chambers, false doors, and passages to thwart would-be robbers or malevolent spirits. The Great Pyramids at Giza stand as some of the most enduring symbols of this belief. The pyramids themselves were built to mirror the rays of the sun, ensuring that the pharaoh's soul would ascend to the heavens and join the gods in the afterlife. Within these tombs, the pharaoh was buried with an array of material goods, jewelry, food, weapons, and sometimes even chariots, meant to provide for the soul's needs on its journey. This careful preparation for the afterlife reflected the Egyptians' belief that death was not an end, but a continuation of the soul's journey in another realm. The elaborate burial practices of Egypt were not limited to royalty. Many tombs across Egypt, even those of lesser individuals, included similar offerings to ensure the deceased had what was needed for the afterlife. The tomb of an ordinary person, while simpler, would still often contain food and tools, intended to sustain the deceased on their journey. Some tombs also featured wall paintings depicting the deceased in daily life, further underscoring the Egyptian belief that the afterlife was merely a continuation of life, albeit in a different form. These scenes often depicted the deceased engaging in activities they enjoyed in life, hunting, farming, or interacting with family, showing that death was not a total separation but a continuation of existence in another realm. Much like the Egyptians, the ancient Chinese believed that death was a passage into another form of existence. However, their approach to the afterlife focused on ancestor worship and the protection of the deceased by the living. The tombs of the emperors, such as the famous tomb of Qin Shi Huang, are among the most notable in China. The terracotta army, buried alongside the first emperor of China, is an astonishing testament to the belief that the dead required protection from dangers in the afterlife. Thousands of life-sized clay soldiers, horses, and chariots were buried in formation, guarding the emperor's tomb as if preparing for battle. This symbolic army was meant to ensure that the emperor would continue to rule in the afterlife, as he had in life. The tomb was built to reflect the emperor's earthly kingdom, complete with palatial designs, ensuring that his transition into the afterlife would be as seamless as possible. In addition to the terracotta army, Qin Shi Huang's tomb contained a wealth of material goods, meant to provide the emperor with all that he would need in the afterlife. These offerings were not just for sustenance, but also to maintain his power and influence in the next world. The emperor's tomb, like that of the pharaohs of Egypt, was a site of immense wealth and protection. It was designed not only to house the emperor's remains but to serve as a spiritual sanctuary, safeguarding the emperor's soul from harm and ensuring that his legacy would continue to resonate across time. The Chinese belief in the continued existence of the soul in the afterlife also reflected a deep reverence for ancestors. In Chinese culture, the tomb was not just for the individual, it was a place for the entire family to connect with their ancestors and offer them respect. Ancestor worship played an essential role in the spiritual life of the Chinese, and many tombs were constructed with this in mind. The tomb became a place for the living to pay homage to the dead, ensuring that the spirits of ancestors would watch over their descendants and continue to provide guidance and protection. Offerings of food, incense, and symbolic items were left at the tombs as a means of maintaining this connection, keeping the spirits of the dead present in the daily lives of the living. While the Egyptians and Chinese had a rich and developed belief in the afterlife, other cultures approached death with a more ambiguous or less structured understanding of what came after life. In ancient Greece, for example, death was viewed as a journey to the underworld, ruled by the god Hades. The Greeks believed that the afterlife was not one of eternal reward but a dark and shadowy existence, where souls wandered without purpose. However, Greek tombs were still constructed with great care and reverence, ensuring that the deceased would be honored and remembered by the living. Greek tombs often featured elaborate inscriptions, epitaphs, and statues, celebrating the virtues of the deceased and ensuring that their memory would endure. These memorials were intended to keep the deceased present in the world of the living, offering a way for the living to connect with the dead. Unlike the Egyptians, who envisioned the afterlife as a continuation of life on earth, the Greeks believed that the soul had a more passive existence in the afterlife. Despite this, Greek tombs were designed to ensure that the deceased would not be forgotten. Many tombs contained items meant to honor the person's life and achievements, from pottery and clothing to jewelry and personal items. These objects were not intended for the deceased's use in the afterlife but as a means of honoring their life on earth. The ancient Romans shared many of the same beliefs as the Greeks, but their tombs were more elaborate and more closely linked to the concept of legacy and remembrance. Roman tombs were often grand structures, designed to reflect the social status of the deceased. These tombs were built along major roads or in prominent locations, allowing passers-by to see the grand monuments erected in memory of the deceased. Roman tombs often featured large inscriptions and elaborate sculptures, celebrating the life and achievements of the deceased. These memorials were intended to ensure that the deceased would be remembered by future generations, allowing their legacy to live on even after their death. Much like the Greeks, the Romans believed in honoring the dead through offerings and rituals. Tombs were visited regularly by family members, who would leave offerings of food, wine, and incense to nourish the soul. These rituals were intended to maintain the connection between the living and the dead, ensuring that the deceased would continue to watch over their family and provide guidance in the afterlife. Roman tombs, with their grand sculptures, inscriptions, and memorials, were not just places for the dead but spaces for the living to continue their relationship with those who had passed. In the Americas, the Maya civilization developed its own unique approach to the afterlife and the construction of tombs. For the Maya, death was seen as a transition to the underworld, where the soul would have to navigate various challenges before reaching the afterlife. Maya tombs, especially those of the elite, were filled with rich offerings meant to provide sustenance for the soul and ensure its success in the afterlife. The tomb of the Maya ruler Pakal the Great, discovered in Palenque in the 1950s, is one of the most famous examples of this practice. The tomb contained an impressive array of treasures, including jade jewelry, ceramics, and even human sacrifices. These offerings were intended to help Pakal's soul navigate the underworld and emerge victorious in the afterlife. The tombs of the Maya were often built within temples or pyramids, reflecting the belief that the ruler's journey through death and into the afterlife was a sacred and divine event. The pyramid itself acted as a spiritual conduit, a symbol of the ruler's ascent to the gods. The Maya believed that the soul of the ruler would continue to have influence over the living world, even after death, and as such, these tombs were not just for the burial of the dead but were also seen as important sites for maintaining the ruler's connection to the people. The tombs of the Maya, like those of other ancient cultures, were designed to ensure that the deceased would have the tools, protection, and nourishment needed for their journey. Whether through the treasures found in the tomb, the rituals performed by the living, or the spiritual connections that were maintained, these burial sites were a reflection of the deep human desire to transcend death and ensure that the deceased continued to play a role in the world of the living. As we explore these tombs and the cultures that created them, we gain not only insight into their beliefs and practices but also a greater understanding of the universal human desire to honor the dead and ensure their lasting influence.